What's up, guys? All right. I have a guest tonight, Southern Israelite. This is, I think this is going to be interesting. I wanted to have him on the channel because I had gotten an email from him about some of the manosphere type of stuff, and he wrote up a paper on that. And I started looking into his videos more. And I thought that, he was a really interesting guy and just had a lot of interesting things to say. Now, obviously, I have to say this, like, just because I have someone on my channel doesn't mean that I 100% agree with everything that what they say, but I think it's good for us to explore different ideas, to understand why people believe things that they do, and then maybe we find some things that change our mind in different areas, right? That's one thing that I try to do in my life is, one of the things I think I said to Southern Israelite when I emailed them is I said, the basic idea of ignorance is that you can't know when you're ignorant, right? That's what ignorance is. It's you have no ability to detect your ignorance. So it's always good to, go back and forth and to not just assume some of the things are right. So we're going to talk about, and I'm saying this because we're going to be talking about some pretty out there ideas in terms of the mainstream, right? So a lot of you guys are going to be like, well, I know when I've talked about flat earth before, some people go nuts about that kind of stuff. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of preface that just so you guys know, what we're getting into here. So welcome, man. Welcome. You prefer to go by, what do you prefer to go by?
You can call me Drake. That's fine. Just call me Drake.
All right. Yeah. Welcome, Drake. So maybe we could just start by you giving kind of a little bit of an intro of who you are and, a little bit of your story.
I mean, I was raised in a pretty liberal family. My father was a traditional kind of Thomas Jefferson libertarian type. He more or less sided kind of conservative Democrat in his politics. I was raised in the public school, not a lot of religion at all growing up. My parents more or less just, took us to a liberal church on Sunday, and then the rest of the week it was sports and TV and just typical normie life in America. And when I was right out of high school, I got a friend of mine from high school he had been a model over in Italy, and he had a drug overdose over there, and he called out to God and asked him, he said, if you let me survive through this drug overdose, like, I'll seek after you. And he was my best friend, and he started getting into some wild Eastern stuff right at first, but then he started reading the Bible, and he was converted. He believed in Christ just by reading the Bible himself. Started attending one of these fundamental Baptist churches out in California, and he talked to me about. He came to me and talked to me about it, and he ended up converting me as well. And he had you have to know this guy, man. He was extreme dude. And for him to become a believer in the Bible and stop doing drugs and drinking and stop with all the carousing with women was, it really shook me. And I knew he was serious. So I took what he was saying seriously. And basically the same thing happened to me. I just read the Bible and studied and came to a faith in Christ just by reading the words of the Gospels. But I spent 12 years in the Christian church trying to figure out which denomination I'm supposed to be in. And it ended up with me basically leaving Christianity in total. I went to graduate school. I was a Presbyterian minister in training, and I loved the church I was in. I loved the people. It was great. I had no big overriding problems, any personal problems with anyone in the church. It was just getting over all the metaphysics. It was just all the study that I did led me to the conclusion that the church basically around the 4th century had basically melded in the Bible with this ancient Greek philosophy called Neoplatonism. And which basically where Neoplatonism comes from is from Plato. Plotinus writes his Enneads, like 3rd century or so. He has actually schoolmates, he's actually classmates with Origen under Ammonius Saccas, the creator of Neoplatonism. And, they basically just gave a more fuller outworking of the philosophy of Plato. And, Plato's philosophy was basically God is this omnipresent sphere. We're all contained in this sphere. and God is this omnipresent sphere, and that's why all the planets tend toward being a sphere, because of this idea. There's this idea that God is a sphere, and that's where the concept of the globe Earth came from. Am I having technical difficulties with my camera?
No, it's just a
No.
little bit of focus, but it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so I basically came to the conclusion that that the church had basically adopted, kind of arrogated to itself Neoplatonism, from the very beginning, and kind of set aside a lot of what the Bible said about science and the earth, and kind of shrug their nose at the Bible, and because they thought that their Greco-Roman ancestors were smarter than these, stupid primitive shepherds in the, so that was a hard thing for me to come to grips with, and I studied, and I found out that there was this early group. The original groups that followed the Messiah were these two messianic groups called the Nazarenes and the Ebionites.
Right.
And the Nazarenes, I ended up following them. They accepted the New Testament, they accepted Christ, they accepted Paul, but they didn't believe in this Trinity doctrine. They didn't believe in metaphysics. They didn't believe that the Old Testament law was all done away with. They believed that basically they should be living the same general lifestyle that their ancestors had lived for thousands of years. So, I basically sided with them, and I just, I found out that, no one believes this stuff. I mean, these guys, this early group, there's like this Hebrew roots movement nowadays, which is, closer to what the Nazarenes said. But, there's this theology in the Hebrew roots movement that was all created by this Jesuit priest named Manuel Lacunza, this futurism things, the Zionist movement, that all comes out of this Jesuit priest named Manuel Lacunza and this other Jesuit priest named Francisco Ribera. So I've basically, it's just basically a handful of dudes that I associate with, and it's my mission to kind of create kind of a pre-industrial, community with people who believe these kind of things. This more of a Jewish Nazarene approach to the Bible and the New Testament. I'm not an atheist. I don't reject Jesus. I'm not saying, just because I say I'm not a Christian, it doesn't mean I'm an atheist or I reject Jesus. It just means that I don't approach the Bible through the lens of Greco-Roman philosophy. I approach the Bible through the science and the parameters that are laid out in the Law of Moses. That's basically my understanding of the Bible. So that's basically where I'm at. I wrote just a bunch of stuff on all this stuff of my whole journey leaving the church, and why I left the church, the theology, the science. I wrote a 1,000-page encyclopedia on the flat Earth issue. I've never found anyone who's written a more definitive answer to all the objections and controversies on the flat Earth movement. And I wrote an essay on the flood, Noah's flood, and Darwinism, and I feel satisfied that I do believe that though the Bible has been greatly tampered with by the church through a long life of study and understanding the texts and how they were changed by the priests, you can get to the truth, but it is difficult. But I do believe that we can reconstruct the original intentions of the authors of the Bible. There's a few books in the Bible that I don't believe in. I think a few of the books need to go, but overall, I accept the law and the prophets. I accept Christ. I do believe that Paul was an apostle of Christ. He wasn't one of the 12 apostles, but he was a powerful instrument of God, and I do accept his writings. So then, that's where, and then I've also, especially this last year, I've come to a more fuller understanding of what modern technology and industrialism is, and the effect that it's had on people's morality, on their kind of outlook on life. It's life is no more about, preserving a future and fighting in the world and preserving a future for your children and, kind of your tribe and your people into the future. It's just all about people's ease, their entertainment, and their victimhood. And that is what people's life is in the industrial society. I read Ted Kaczynski's Industrial Society and His Future. I'll never look at the world the same again after that. It was one of the most profound pieces of writing I've ever read before. I was a Luddite back in 2012 after I did my study, my research. About 2012 to 2014 was when I finished my book on Southern history. And, I was a Luddite after I finished that book, but Ted Kaczynski kind of more, took me more primitive. And, I basically, my goal, what I think is a solution to this is the creation of a new pre-industrial society. But I don't think it can happen with the men that exist now in this system. I don't think it's possible. I think these men, they have to go through some real struggle, some real fighting, and they're going to have to go through some hell here. And I think it's coming on them right now.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you with that. That's for sure. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't think I've ever talked about this on this channel, but I actually was at one point in my life, I taught a Bible study, and I was in a Christian church, and I thought it was interesting because I was leading a Bible study at the church. They had kind of asked for someone to do it, and my basis, like when I was put in charge of leading the Bible study, my whole plan was, okay, well, let's just take the Bible and let's just read it, and then let's see what it says. Let's leave everything we think we know about religion and Christianity at the door, and let's just read the Bible. Well, my Bible study got shut down pretty quick.
Oh yeah.
because one of the books we went through Revelation, and I was like, okay, maybe it's not like that movie, or that book series, right? It's like, let's just see what it says. And a lot of the books of the Bible, and it was kind of interesting because at that point, like, I'd grown up Christian, and it was kind of interesting because, like, some of the things like the Trinity, there just wasn't a lot of great evidence. Now I know that people make, again, there's plenty of arguments on both sides that people, there's always apologetics, but when I just straight read, there was a lot of concepts that I was like, where'd I get this concept from? And I realized it was because someone inserted it into my mind. It wasn't because it actually came from the text itself. So I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of people do not actually, pay attention to the actual text and actually everything. Again, we're going to talk about some pretty controversial subjects, but one thing, as I was researching kind of your work and stuff, is that whether I agree with you or not, like, you research topics and you have a really good argument and understanding of them, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that someone's 100% correct just because they do that, but at least, like, so many people, they have an opinion, but it's not a well thought out opinion, and it's not an informed opinion. And so I think that's one of the things that really appealed to me having you on the channel, is because we can discuss some of these things, because you have, like, reasoning for, and I guess we'll get into some of the things like flat Earth. Maybe that's a good place to go. We'll attract some people here with this, but tell me, tell me why, like, and I did a video before on flat Earth, and I was saying that I think there's maybe like a 5% probability that the Earth is flat, that I don't really have any, like, 100% beliefs, right? My whole idea is that, like, I have probabilities of things being true or not, but certainty is really difficult to come by. But why are you in the camp of the Earth being flat?
Okay, I mean, it all comes down, the primary, that obviously it's what the Bible says. It's just obviously what the text of the Bible says. In Genesis chapter 1, God begins creation with a great deep of water, and then he pulls up the land from the water, and then he puts a dome, a firmament over the earth, and he says in Genesis 1:14 to 20, it talks about how the sun, moon, and stars are in the firmament. And there's no way around this. This is a flat earth model. God doesn't begin creation with a molten iron core and then layer some strata around, or some lava or magma, and then none of that is in there. It's clearly a flat earth model. And then when you look in Proverbs chapter 8, The author talks about there being this circular boundary that holds in the oceans, and that's basically the Gleason map of 1894. I mean, it's word for word what the Bible says. That's number one.
So
Number
okay.
two, go ahead.
Hold on. Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I can already tell the pushback, because I have this pushback as well, which is that is an assumption that the Bible is correct. Not everyone assumes that the Bible is correct. Well, I mean, I guess there's two assumptions there. One is that the Bible is inerrant, that, you know, at least the Old Testament is the inerrant word of God. And then the second one would be that that it is a literal interpretation, right? So maybe like, and again, I want to get to the next thing, but I want to make sure that we don't gloss over this. So what would you say about that? Like,
well, if you look as far as like taking it literally, I mean, when you look in Psalm chapter 19, the author says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows the work of his hands. The definitive argument for the existence of God is the nature of the earth, and that there is a dome. We're not in some infinite vacuum. We're not some accidental meteorological accident in some infinite vacuum, some chemistry explosion. Right. No, we are living in a terrarium environment, and that just flatly proves prima facie evidence that there is a special creation here. We have been specially created. We are in this terrarium environment under this designer. And that's clearly the argument, the whole mind of Psalm chapter 19, that what he's trying to prove is that, you know, when we look out on in the sky, you know, the atmosphere isn't like escaping out. Why is that? You know, it is. Now we're going to get to gravity here in just a second, but this idea that we're on this ball in a vacuum, that it's spinning 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, it's moving 60,000 miles around the sun, orbiting. You know, you've got entropy. The vacuum would be sucking the atmosphere off of the earth. You've got centrifugal forces of the earth spinning and moving. You've got friction with it actually orbiting. You got all these massive forces would destroy Earth's atmosphere, and yet it's the same stable environment every single day. You know, if you get rid of gravity, there's only one conclusion. We're living under a dome here. We're in an enclosed terrarium environment. Now, of course, what the heliocentrists are going to do, they're going to pull out their metaphysics, and they're going to say, well, you know, we got this gravity thing. All right, the gravity thing is what explains the atmosphere and all that. And I've written the most detailed criticism of gravity that I've ever come across. The number one just scientific fact that just completely debunks gravity is the central feature of, and it doesn't matter whether you are a geocentrist or a heliocentrist, it's the same in both models. The sun is the primary feature in both of those models. In Tycho Brahe's model, which is the classic geocentrist model, the Earth is in the center of the universe, but all of the rest of celestial bodies orbit the sun, and the sun orbits around the Earth, but all the rest of celestial bodies are fixed on the sun. So the sun is the primary attractive body in both the geocentric and heliocentric models. And in both of those models, they have to teach that the sun is exploding. It's an exploding bomb, and it's attracting all the planets to it at the same time. So it's both exploding and attracting. It's a fundamental contradiction right at the very heart of the theory. And all they have to do, they just play sophistry and metaphysics with you. Yeah. The second thing is we've got evidence all over the earth where we should have tides, you know, and we don't have them. Mediterranean seas, lakes, we have all over the world. I have this documented in my encyclopedia. All over the world, Leeds, all over the British Isles. You know, 19th century, early 20th century authors pointed this out. High tide would come in 11 to 12 hours after the moon passes the meridian. Newton's theory stated that high tide should come in when the moon's passing the meridian. We've got it documented all over the world. That's not the case. It comes in 11 to 12 hours after the moon passes the meridian in many places on the earth. And we go on and on and on. But yeah, okay, those two right there pretty much settle for me. There's no gravity. There's no gravity.
Okay, so So okay, I mean, there's a few things I think to unpack here.
All right.
First of all, what is your definition of metaphysics? Just so everyone,
Right.
because I know there's
Okay.
some confusion.
I would take my definition from the works of A.J. Ayer and Rudolf Carnap. They did their elimination of metaphysics articles they wrote. The idea of something that, first of all, the first definition is the way that the Christians use the word, which is some concept or entity that transcends human understanding. That's the first thing. It's outside of the categories of human language. God is not a noun. God is not a verb. God is not an adverb. God transcends all of these categories of language in Aristotelian logic. That's the first definition, the way the Christians use it. The second way, that the way A.J. Ayer and Rudolf Carnap used it when it comes to science, is something that transcends physical reality. An abstract idea that people reify, that people attribute concrete reality to. That's metaphysics.
Okay.
In the scientific context.
So
take for gravity, atoms,
right.
these lines that are drawn in optical geometry. That's metaphysics. It used to be. This is a really important point for these guys to understand. And this is not my opinion. I got this from Piercy Brigman. Read his book, The Logic of Modern Physics, and he goes through all of this. The way that Euclidean geometry used to work in astronomy was these lines that they would draw in their equations. These lines represented beams of corpuscles. There was two major theories of light in historical physics. There's the corpuscular theory, which is that light is what Piercy Brigman calls the ballistic theory. That light is this beam of corpuscles that are projecting through a vacuum. That's the corpuscular theory. The other theory was the wave theory. But the wave theory was never put into a context of a scientific geometry and Euclidean geometry. That all becomes non-Euclidean geometry later, and it gets complete clusterfuck.
Oh, yeah.
The original model during the scientific revolution was that astronomy and the geometry of astronomy is to be explained through this corpuscular theory, that beams of corpuscles are projecting through a vacuum. But there was the experiments of Philip Lenard and others proved that light is not a corpuscle. It's more or less a wave. But there's all kinds of problems with nobody has really definitively proved what light is. So it's kind of an open question still in science.
Yeah, no, that's very true. In fact, I think a lot of the problems, I'm with you on the metaphysics part, because there's so many things that we call science that we just accept generally.
Yeah.
And when you read news articles and you read articles about scientific discoveries, they just assume things like, one of my biggest pet peeves is when you see a news article and it says 5 million years ago, as if anyone could possibly know. I mean, for all we know, the sun didn't exist 5 million years ago. Like, for all we know, like, we're living in an epoch which is going to end, and all of physics are going to reverse the other direction, like tomorrow. Like, that could be the case. Like, if you had been born at sunrise and you died before sunset, you would never know that there was a world that the sun ever set it, right? I think but there's a lot of assumptions, right? The whole dark matter, right? Like you said, the atoms, the whole dark matter thing has always really bothered me quite a bit, because it doesn't. It's like we're just inventing stuff to fit the theory, the Big Bang, the whole idea of a singularity. It could go on and on. Quantum physics, right? The contradictions that are just explained away as this is like, how is it possible that these things do not fit within anything that makes sense? It can't be that our model is wrong. It must be that that it's just weird.
Well, I'm going to tell you what they're going to say. I've debated all the top guys in the whole globe Earth thing. I spent years doing this. What they're basically going to say is that we basically flushed human reason. Human reason has to go. Human reason gets in the way of science and scientific progression, technological progression. And basically, if you read Carlo Rovelli is a leading physicist. He teaches at the University of Pittsburgh and other places all over the world. He wrote a book called Reality is Not What It Seems. And he basically lays out in there that modern physics and quantum physics has gone all the way back to Anaximander, the ancient pre-Socratic philosopher from like 2,500 years ago. And when you actually study all these books, all these people's philosophies, Newton, Galileo, Einstein, the modern physics, the development of quantum mechanics, you realize humanity has never really progressed past the ancient theologies that were debated like 23 to 2,500 years ago by the Greeks in the pre-Socratic era. No one's really ever gotten past that point. They pretty much laid out every theory that could be laid out. And everybody basically reduces, if they're consistent, reduce back to one of these ancient theologies, especially during the pre-Socratic era.
Now, what about, so I kind of want to delve a little bit into the atoms and things, but before I do, I think, with the flat earth stuff, because like I said, I've got about a 5% probability in my head that it's flat. Like I'm still 95% sure that the earth is round, even though I've seen all the things. Like there are some things like, like I've seen the biggest ones for me is like when you look, the experiments where you have a body of water and then you measure across it and you should see a drop on the other side for like a tower on the other side. Like those things, to me, it's like, this is like some pretty conclusive evidence. It's pretty difficult to, but there may be an explanation. But the biggest one I think that's in most people's minds, and still, this is probably why I'm in the 95 percentile of believing that the earth is round, is because of the, and this is the argument that I get whenever I play the devil's advocate, is about NASA and space. And now the pictures and stuff obviously are all composite images. It has to be at the scale, right? But what about, like things like sending a probe to Mars? I know, it's one thing to say like, moon landing was faked and on a stage. And I think there's some, I think that's pretty plausible in my mind. But to say that like, people like Elon Musk, that, the Mars rover, like that, all these complicated physics that was used in calculations to do this, and all the programmers that were involved in that thing, it's like, how can you like come to terms with all those things?
Yeah, same thing with the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was hundreds of thousands of people working on a secret mission together, and no one knew about it. And if you read the book Tragedy and Hope by Professor Quigley, he pointed out that there was only a class of 12 people in the whole world that really knew what was going on. It was that compartmentalized. There was only 12 people in the whole world that actually knew what the Manhattan Project was going towards. But there were hundreds of thousands of people that were working on it, and no one knew about it. And it was all kept secret until these bombs allegedly hit in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But I mean, this is not my, like, combing through all the conspiracies and all the fakery and the camera footage is not something that I devoted most of my life to, because there was so many people doing that. It's so entertaining for people that they just flooded the internet with this stuff. I mean, you just Google search bubbles in space, and I got all that documented in my first book on the flat earth. That's well known. These astronauts have been caught numerous times in underground swimming pools with these bubbles coming up out of their masks. It was all fake, and it was all originally this footage was all told us it was all real. The recent SpaceX rocket, they caught a mouse on the back of the rocket. In public, there's articles, big mainstream articles that talk about this. Yes, there was a mouse caught on the back of the rocket. They saw a mouse crawling around the thruster in the back of the rocket.
But this would have to be like, if you take SpaceX, right? It'd have to be a pretty big conspiracy, like with Elon Musk being involved in it, and then, I mean, so who's pulling the string? Like, so what I could get from what you said, which makes sense, right? Because you're right about the Manhattan Project, because I studied the Manhattan Project a lot, Feynman and everything, working on that, and he talked about it a lot, what was going on behind those closed doors. And you're right, you could have something where you have like 12 guys that know what's really going on, and even they to only have some pieces of it, and then you have 100,000 other people that are just like doing what they're supposed to do, doing the calculations. They don't really know what the calculations are for, right? I think you could do that. So in the model that you're kind of describing, what I could see is that maybe you have like some group of people that really understand what's going on, and then you have all these engineers and scientists that are doing these calculations on space and simulated things that are not actually accurate. But then the question would be like, there'd be two questions, right? One is who would be pulling these strings? Then the second thing would be why, because again, it's a pretty big jump. Now, after Snowden happened, I think we all had to question, like, are conspiracy theories that seem like they're ridiculous actually possible? Because that was like it flipped the world upside down for a lot of people. Like, wow, actually the government is spying on every single thing that you're doing, and they do have a supercomputer that can parse every single message that's being sent in the US. So that was, so I could see that it's plausible, but again, like I said, why would this be happening, and then who would be doing it? Because it is massive effort to coordinate that, right?
Yeah. So basically, the ruling elite they're Gnostics and Satanists, and the Gnostic, to understand this, you have to understand what Gnosticism is, and this is not a conspiracy theory. Elaine Pagels at the United Nations, she is kind of the hallmark theologian of the United Nations. She is an avowed Gnostic. This is not a conspiracy theory. Then the globalist establishment are Gnostics. Gnosticism teaches that the material world that we're living in was created by a malicious God, the God of the Old Testament. And Jesus was this figure that was come to overthrow the material oppressive structure of the Old Testament malicious God Jehovah. And basically the serpent originally in the garden, which is where this is where the Satanism connection comes in. The serpent's the good guy in their theology. The serpent was trying to liberate man from the oppressive regime of Jehovah. And basically these people, they literally are they're trying to fight a war against God. They know he exists. They know that the earth is flat. They know that they know the proper biology and physics of this world. It's explained in the continuum mechanics and the Pleomorphic school of medicine. They know all that stuff is real, and they practice that themselves. But they arrogate that knowledge to themselves to gain power, and they want to destroy the church. They want to destroy all the old ways of life, and they are going with this prophecy of this guy named Joachim of Fiore. Joachim of Fiore is one of the most important people in the history of Western history. He had a prophecy that there were three ages of the world: the age of the Father, which was the Jewish theocracy; the age of the Son, which is the traditional feudal Catholic conservative civilization; and then this third age, which is the liberation of humanity from all hierarchical institutions, from all text and liturgy of the ancient religions. We're going to get rid of all that. Everyone's going to be liberated from all that in universal love. That is Joachim's prophecy. That was adopted by Hegel. It was adopted by Aleister Crowley with his teaching of the crown and conquering child. So that the age that we're living in is to destroy, to deconstruct, and to destroy all the traditional ways of life. No more nation state. No more traditional patriarchy and organic community. No more traditional religion, and not total depopulation, but mostly depopulation. That is the program. That is the program that's laid out by H.G. Wells in his book Open Conspiracy. So you have two primary traditions right now that are coming against the traditional. It's not just traditional Christianity. It's all the ancient patriarchal traditions, not just Western. Everybody, they want a global monastic Joachimite technocracy. That's what they want, and they have to destroy all the old patriarchal religions and destroy faith in all the old the holy books. That's the whole plan here. And don't believe me, read H.G. Wells' book Open Conspiracy. Read his in New World Order. He tells you everything. Charles Galton Darwin's book The Next Million Years. And guess what sexual model is laid out in Charles Galton Darwin's The Next Million Years? It's the elite men on the top get to have sex with all the women, and the vast majority of the men become sterile worker ants. All you MGTOW boys out there, all you men's right. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar to you?
But they're helping propagate it, is what they're doing too, right? So that's kind of funny. Yeah, like
that James Bond movie where I think it's Diamonds Are Forever, where that madman went out to outer space. He created that space platform out in outer space, and then he had all these women out there, and then he was going to destroy the Earth, and he was going to repopulate the Earth with all these women. It's this breakaway civilization thing. That's their plan. But in order to get that passed, they have to destroy all the traditional manhood. That has to be destroyed. And
Right.
they have to go after the holy books, man. That
Yeah.
NASA, all these big schools, all these political movements, they're all their whole focus is to destroy all the old traditional patriarchal men, and you have to destroy their faith in their holy books. That's
Now,
what this is
okay.
about.
That's still so then okay, so then I could really boil down to what you're saying is that the reason why you would have this kind of global conspiracy to hide to make people believe that the earth is round
It's
is
an open
primarily,
conspiracy. That's what H.G. Wells called it, an open conspiracy.
you say it's open because everyone is aware of it, but really though it's closed in the sense that there's only certain people that really know who's orchestrating and why they're doing it. But essentially what you're saying is that the reason for this is to destroy the faith, is primarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm trying to get what you're aiming at, which is to say that's to destroy man's faith in their holy books,
Yes.
because all of the books, Bible, Quran,
Patriarchy. It teaches nation state. These are the 4 planks that H.G. Wells lays out. We have to destroy the nation state. We have to destroy the old patriarchal communities. We have to destroy the old religions, and we have to depopulate. That's the four prong program that he lays out in his book Open Conspiracy.
But why this particular issue? I don't want to drill too much into this, but
What,
I
the
mean,
globe Earth?
Yeah, like why
Earth
not? Why not just let people believe that the Earth is flat? And work in other ways, right? To destroy religion, to destroy.
I remember when I was in school, when I took Western Civilization 101, as a freshman in college, this is what they do to all the students when they come into college. Western Civilization 101, one of the first weeks that they lecture the kids. Kids, I know y'all have been raised up in these churches. You've been taught to believe the Bible and there's a God and all this. But science has proved that the earth is a ball. We're hurling through a vacuum around the sun. So you can dispense with this thing about the Bible and traditional religion. I mean, they do that like freshmen, like first semester in all these colleges. That's what happened to me. Everybody that I've talked to, they admit to me that's my professor did say that.
That's a pretty solid argument, because one of the things I think that cracks, which maybe we can just transition right into that, which cracks a lot of people's religious viewpoints, is evolution, right? I know that the whole, because science starts to say, oh well, you can't possibly believe this. I mean, we have so much evidence, we have so much proof, and so therefore it makes you question the Bible, and then you question whether or not any of it is true.
Their proofs turned out to be scams. It's well known that the famous Piltdown man was a total hoax. A Jesuit priest, Teilhard de Jardin, was behind that. I cannot underestimate the role that Teilhard de Jardin played in this whole globalist conspiracy. He was the man that trained Julian Huxley. He was a mentor of Julian Huxley. Julian Huxley is the man that creates UNESCO at the United Nations. The education wing at United Nations created by Julian Huxley. Who is his mentor? A Jesuit priest named Pierre Teilhard de Jardin. Okay.
Now the Jesuit connection here that is that they're basically, if I understand my history correct, they're like a branch of almost like Templars, right? They came off of the Catholic Church. They worship the Mother Mary, and then the Pope. They're basically like trying to reinstate the power of the Catholic Church, the Pope, and there's
but you got to understand though, they want to get rid of the second. They're going with Joachim. If you read the book, The Secret Instructions of the Jesuits, and I had this documented on my blog, it states very clearly in there that they follow the prophecy of Joachim. So they're against traditional Catholicism. They want an end of that old feudal Catholic civilization. They want for things to be a bit more communist. Now if you read H.G. Wells' book Open Conspiracy, he lets you know, and let me give you the connection between H.G. Wells and this whole thing. H.G. Wells was a protege. He was like the student of the Huxley family. Charles Darwin writes out his theory in the 1860s. His biggest apologist was a man named Thomas Huxley. The Huxley family becomes hugely predominant in the kind of social Darwinist, globalist movement coming out of the British Isles, the United Kingdom in the late 1800s.
Now, is Aldous Huxley in that line, or is that
yes?
Aldous?
Yes.
Okay, because he wrote Brave New World, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. He also wrote another extremely important book called Doors of the Mind or something like that. He was really important in the psychedelic movement. And with Timothy Leary, who was also Jesuit trained. Timothy Leary was Jesuit trained at Worcester, Massachusetts, the Holy Cross College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. He was a Jesuit boy, CIA. He said in public that the whole consciousness movement, this big hippie movement, the psychedelic movement, that was all created by the CIA and his efforts in Harvard and MIT. And who was the ringleader of all that? It was Aldous Huxley at MIT. Aldous Huxley's lectures that he gave at MIT. So you have the Huxley family comes to predominance with the social Darwinist school in the late 1800s because they're the primary apologists of this theory of Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin's theory, I'm sorry, that was adopted by the elite. I mean, up until what, 30, 40 years ago, when the big racial stuff started getting really big in America. I mean, Charles Darwin's theory is extremely racial theory. It was a racial supremacist theory.
Yeah.
The Anglo-Saxon atheist people who followed him believed that they were the superior race and that they deserved to colonize the whole world because they were the superior race. They got all that from Charles Darwin. Anyway.
Yeah, that's something interesting too, right? It's like just the idea that, like, because if you truly believe in evolution, and again, there's some, I've got certain probabilities of belief there. I'm probably more Lamarckian than anything, but
I'm a Lamarckian.
Okay, good. Okay, because that's the only thing that makes sense to me, right? But like, if you truly believe in Darwinian evolution, then you have to believe in superiority of certain races, like, because that was in the title. It was in the title. To be true, right? Like, right? Yeah. Because the only way that all races are completely equivalent in attributes like intelligence is if God designed them in such a way, right? Otherwise, it's evolution. And heck, in breeds of dogs, right? Which there's definitely dumb breeds of dogs and smart breeds of dogs and aggressive breeds of dogs and whatnot. So I think it's kind of interesting. But I mean, this is very unpopular topic for anyone to talk about. Is that concept? But I just, again, I'm not trying to make a point necessarily, like trying to convince someone of that, but I'm just saying that, like, in order to hold Darwinian evolutionary beliefs as it's spelled out, then you also have to hold a racial hierarchy belief, because those two things follow each other. Like, it drives me nuts. Like, again, I don't care which side of the argument you fall on, like if you're against Darwinian evolution, but you can't hold two contradictory beliefs. And I think so many people inside, it's amazing how much of society is holding those two beliefs. And it's, to me, it's just absolute ridiculousness, right? I mean,
the subtitle of the book was the first title. The main title was Origin of Species. The subtitle was The Preservation of Favored Races. He says it right in the subtitle. And so, look, this pure atheist thing, that was just provisional. That was the New World Order wanted that. That was just provisional. They wanted to use the pure atheist model of Darwin to deconstruct. To basically deconstruct the traditional English church, and then to kind of quarterback it with their metaphysical school. And I maintain that happened in 1967. I think that the main point where the metaphysicians took over from the old pure Darwinists in the New World Order was in 1967, where you have the Beatles album, the Sgt. Pepper's album. You got that huge crowd of dudes right there on the front of that album. That's the new kind of ruling ideology of the New World Order right there. That's the Joachimite Gnostic ruling class being put right in the faces of everybody right there.
Now, what about the kind of, well, I guess maybe it's worth talking about the Lamarckian in kind of because I listened to something like that you had put together that I thought was really good on dinosaurs and dragons, and I thought it was kind of interesting because I had definitely read a lot of the young Earth type of material, and it was pretty compelling. I think there's some good arguments on both sides, but I had not encountered some of the texts, the ancient Greek text, so much of it that address dragons. And it was just
Oh, yeah.
like, by the time you had gone through all those points, I was like, wow, this is just absolutely insane that we
Yep.
would give credibility to someone like Plius, the am I saying the right name? Plius, I can't think of his name.
Plotinus? What do you mean? You talking about
The elder,
Plotinus?
Plius the elder,
Pliny
the elder,
Yeah.
right? Where we'd give so much credence to his historical account, yet then when he says dragons, we dismiss it.
Right.
So maybe it's worth like talking about why, like, because I think so many people that are going to be listening to this again, and guys, just to give you the warning again, hopefully, those of you that are smart that are listening to this, we're exploring ideas here. At least I am, right? I mean, I think that Drake has a pretty good model of his reference for the world, but I'm not convinced either way. I just want to hear what he has to say. I want to like discuss these ideas because this is what I'm interested in, because I don't have an opinion on some of these things. I don't have a well-formed opinion. So let's figure these things out. But that's why I want to tackle evolution so much, like Darwinian evolution, is because I think that a lot of people that are listening to this are just 100% accepting Darwinian evolution. And I want to be clear in saying that I'm not saying that it's absolutely incorrect, but I'm also not saying that it is correct. What I'm saying is, let's look at it and let's see where it stands up and where it doesn't stand up. And from my research, there's a lot of places it doesn't stand up, but maybe give us the holes, like all the holes in Darwinian evolution.
I mean, the main thing, the thing that I think the main point that just refutes the whole book is the fact that Darwin admitted that theistic evolution was possible. He believed that God could be the agent behind evolution. And, I have to side with Charles Hodge, in the 1800s, who wrote a refutation of Darwin. He says, well, if God can be in charge of creation, why can't he be in charge of speciation? Why can't we be creationists and believe God created all these different species? So, like, the whole theory just completely falls apart if you acknowledge that God could be, the cause of all this. And the really crazy part is that there was a book written in 1844 called The Vestiges by a guy named Chalmers, and it basically was a theistic evolutionary book. And the reason why Darwin's theory was accepted is obviously because people thought that his construction could go better with atheism. Because he basically gets away from the idea of teleology in the book. He gets away from the idea that a creature has a nature and with a telos and a purpose. The teleologists believe that if a creature exists in a certain environment because it was designed for those conditions. That's the idea of teleology. Whereas the Darwinian theory was a creature exists in that environment because out of a number of different species, a number of different creatures, it was the only one to survive. That was Darwin's theory.
Okay, now I think it's worth unpacking that a little bit for everyone listening, because and then again, my understanding of that kind of theistic evolution is the idea that, like, well, it addresses like Noah's Ark, right? So the idea that there's so many damn species of insects alone, right, or of cats and dogs and all of these animals. Well, if you have like a theistic evolution, then you could have one sort of gene, you basically have the diversity of the entire gene pool within just one pair of animals, that it's built into them, so that you could have 15 different species come from one, that genetic diversity is built into the actual machinery of the is that kind of like am I understanding that right? Is that or if not, let's unpack that, because I think those
I don't know if I understood what you were saying, because you lost me with the insect thing. Because hold on, the Bible says in Genesis 7, and that basically in the context, numerous different times in the context of the flood, the creatures that Noah brought on the flood were not insects. They were animals, they were mammals. They were breathing with lungs kind of animals. It says all the animals that came on Noah's Ark, it said in whose nostrils was the breath of life. So these are mammalian creatures. It nowhere says that like insects got on board of the ark.
Okay. So let's take the animals, right? Just the mammals, right? Even if you just took all the species of mammals that exist, it's a lot, right? I don't know what the amount is. Clearly, it's quite a large number. So what I was saying was that the way that at least I've always kind of fitted in is to say, well, maybe there was just one type of cat or dog or
let me speak on that.
bear,
Yes,
right?
that exact point. I actually have a debate with some friends of mine on this exact point, because the Bible says originally that birds flew in the firmament of the heavens. I believe that like ostriches and any like flightless cormorants, these are devolved species from the original birds. I don't believe
Okay.
that all the species that exist today existed in the creation.
Right.
We're living in a fallen state here. So, the way that I would define, evolution would be return back to primordial structure. It isn't a moving forward. It's a moving back. That's the basic kind of biblical worldview. We haven't evolved, we've devolved. Man originally, if you read the book of Genesis, the original man, even after the fall, lived like hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's been a devolution, in a breaking down of the genetic program. So, and that's the way I basically explain speciation. Speciation is basically just a form of devolving from ancient, more primordial structure.
Now, what about so for example, I guess where I see it is like the Galapagos Islands, right? The different birds that specialize in the different, ways that they open, got their food, the different beaks for the different nuts. What I've always thought of it as is that the program is complicated enough where it is able to adapt, to situations rather than evolution, right? Because evolution, like the biggest problem that I've always had with evolution is that it's like it requires such a leap, right? And a lot of people use the Darwinian evolution. They use the whole Galapagos Islands and all that, obviously, to show that, okay, well, clearly things evolve, but it really, to me, looks more like an adaptation, like the programmer who programmed that program was smart enough to make it be able to adapt to the environment, but not completely transform into something else.
Right,
no
I agree
matter
with
how much time you give it. Okay, so that's what I was kind of saying about like this idea that I think those things aren't really nearly in opposition to each other, like the idea of a creation plus an evolution, right? Because
I like to stay away completely from the concept of evolution. I would instead of like creationists would call what you just said microevolution. I would just call that microspeciation.
Okay.
That's what I would call it. Yeah, sure. But like you're not going to have, that has limits to it, obviously. And it's that flightless cormorant's never going to turn into an elephant. It's never going to happen.
I always thought it was interesting. Like we do all those experiments, genetic experiments on fruit flies because they have such a short lifespan, and then we have like hundreds and hundreds of generations of fruit flies. But not once has one of those fruit flies ever turned into anything different than a fruit fly. Although they've developed some interesting characteristics, different eye colors, different wings, things like that. But they've never actually become something of any amount of significant difference, even though we're able to see controlled what they call microevolution, but really is adaptation.
Yeah, and let me speak on that exact point, because what they're going to tell you is, oh, well, you need millions of years to get that to happen, and you don't have to believe me. There's an atheist scientist refuted this idea that evolution takes place over small increments over long periods of time. His name was Francis Galton. It's in his doctrine of filial regression. He showed that it's impossible for evolution to take place over long periods of time in short increments. And it's like you look at these guys. It's like, okay, so evolution. What was the phrase that I used? It's one of the hallmarks of the problems, the contradictions. Evolution's too slow to see in real life, but it's too fast to see in the fossil record. So the whole thing. It's completely it's an unfalsifiable, baseless theory.
Yeah,
and it's constantly, they're constantly moving the goalposts, moving the goalposts. And this is another.
If it's unfalsifiable, it can't be considered science, right? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this is one point that I always like to bring up to the guys in the manosphere. You guys are admitting that women today are the same way they were in the ancient world when the older law systems were set up to deal with the nature of women. So you're admitting there's been no change. There's been Nature is static. It's not in flux. So Darwin's debunked, man. That's why you can't hold an atheist ideology as you're moving toward trying to reinstitute some older model. You can't. I'm sorry. You need the Bible.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting. I mean, yeah, because that's very true. Like, I've always believed. I thought it was always interesting. I've always been very against the MGTOW guys because this has always been the nature of women. It's not like things have changed. Yeah. I mean, technologically, I think there's some good points with Instagram and the whole idea of guys becoming weak and giving women so much attention. But you can't really blame women for something that they had been all along. And and really, who's responsible for what's happened, what society has become? It's really men. It's weak men becoming weak that's responsible for it. Because if you have the patriarchy, if you had that and then you let that go, then whose fault is that? So
yeah, I made a video called "Are We Just Now Discovering Female Hypergamy?" I mean, honestly, you guys really believe that like the internet gave us the realization that women are hypergamous? I mean, it's asinine. The question.
It was just behind closed doors before. It was just I mean, the most powerful guys have always had access to all the women, and it's always been it just hasn't been public.
I don't think it's very much behind closed doors. You read the writings of Solomon in the Old Testament. He is explicit on these things in the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes. He is explicit on female hypergamy. And, it's just this, again, I believe in Jesus. I'm not an atheist. But the traditional Christian theology is to blame here. It has told us to ignore the Old Testament. I'm sorry. That is a fundamental doctrine the church has taught for almost 2,000 years.
Okay, so this is one thing I have to address with you too. So, okay, so you believe in following the Old Testament law, like the Torah, essentially, correct? Right, like
as much as we can. But in this society, in this economic structure, the law of Moses means almost nothing in this system. That's why we have to get out of this and we have to create our own system, our own power structure and economic structure.
Well,
but yes, I do believe that we should keep as much of the law of Moses as we can. Yes.
Okay, but as like a Messianic Jew, right? I mean, you would describe yourself as a Messianic Jew. Okay, so then you would keep the law, like the Sabbath. You would.
Here's my CZ right here on the four corners of my garments. I don't shave my beard. I don't put a razor to my beard. Okay. I don't eat pork. I don't eat shellfish. Yeah.
Okay, so you follow the dietary. Now, what about premarital sex and those?
Okay, so I wrote an essay called "The 100 Laws of Man's Sexual Power." I deal with all of this in there. Okay, so premarital sex is not forbidden in the Bible. It's not suggested in the law of Moses. If you read Deuteronomy 22, it says that if a young woman commits premarital sex, it's really bad. So it's against the law but only for girls, not for the men. The men are nowhere mentioned in that chapter. So chastity is for women in the law of Moses. Our lives are much more complicated, so those restrictions are not put on us. So you look at the ancient patriarchs: Abraham, Jacob, David, Moses, even multiple wives, concubines. I'm sorry, a concubine is premarital sex. It is just a verbal agreement you have with a girl. I like you, you like me. We like having sex. You want to have kids together. That's all a concubine is. So, I mean, the church's view, the traditional church's view is wrong because they constantly ignore the Old Testament. They constantly. That's why they get everything wrong in the Bible, or most everything wrong, is because they just ignore the Old Testament. And so, prostitution. Secular prostitution is allowed in the Torah, but temple prostitution is not allowed. So you're not allowed to engage in coitus with a prostitute if it involves the worship of some pagan idol. But prostitution is, secular prostitution is allowed for women who have been divorced, they've been abandoned, widows, something like that. They can become secular prostitutes. 2 prostitutes were put before Solomon. One of the most famous
Right.
stories in the Bible. Notice nobody stood up and said, Solomon, these girls are prostitutes. Let's throw them in jail or kill them for their sin. No.
That's
Secular
interesting,
prostitution is allowed.
So okay, so in your theology, then it would be okay for you to go to a bar, pick up a girl, have sex with her, or to pay a prostitute for sex.
Yes.
Okay. Well, as
Yes.
long as, because I wanted to bring that up because most people would say, as a Messianic Jew, that would not be acceptable, or as a Christian, or as someone who follows.
Oh yeah, and every one of those people goes to a church chock full of feminists.
Right. I mean, again, like I don't necessarily agree, but at the same time, you're self-consistent with your own theology. You see what I'm saying? So that's the main point that I wanted to bring up, is if you're self-consistent with that, if that's then that's not an issue as far as your theology. Whether I agree with it or not is a different matter. But it's self-consistent like that. I mean, there
are a lot of Christians, especially Eastern Orthodox Christians, who are very angry at me for writing that book, that 100 Laws of Sexual Power, because there's a bunch of Eastern Orthodox seminary students who are sneaking out of their monasteries or whatever on the weekends, and they're seeing working girls, and I'm so proud of myself.
I mean, it is interesting. It is interesting, though, again, going back to kind of what we first discussed, because when you do read the Bible, you do find these instances where it is pretty clear that so many of the, God's people have concubines, or that they're visiting prostitutes, right? And it's, there's multiple famous prostitutes.
And God nowhere says anything about it. No, I mean, Samson in Judges 16 is visiting prostitutes.
True.
He is celebrated in Hebrews chapter 11 as a great man of faith. Nowhere do we see anything in the Bible of, he did commit this horrible sin of visiting prostitutes. And in Judges, I'm sorry, Genesis 38, Judah visits a prostitute. He's never rebuked for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm personally am against the idea, just because I feel like it's a crutch for most men to go visit prostitutes, because again, it depends on, it's just like drugs or alcohol. Like, what is the purpose of using it? If you're using alcohol in order to use it as liquid courage, then you're using it as a crutch. Anything you can use as a crutch, right? So if you're unable to get sex with a woman on your own accord, and you pay for it instead, then it's a crutch, because it's preventing you from actually going out there and being a man that's able to
I got a very good retort to that. So
okay.
right before COVID thing happened and all the bars shut down, I went to a bar in Knoxville, Tennessee, and picked up a real cute 23-year-old girl. She threw herself at me pretty hard. I spent more money on her than I ever have with any working girl, ever.
Right. I believe
just picking girls up at a bar is way more expensive.
Right. Well, of course, it's more expensive. I'm not talking about the monetary. I'm just talking about the, whether or not as a man that you can go out and actually procure yourself a woman rather than paying for. I mean, with money, of course, you can get sex, but the question is, are men? We have a lot of weak men today. Are they using prostitution, just like porn, right? Porn is really the bigger problem, right? And prostitution is maybe a minor one, but porn is the biggest problem.
John, I don't know what kind of dudes you're dealing with. I'm having to try to convince these young dudes to go visit an escort and get off his damn video games. This is not funny for me. I'm sorry. This is a really big problem. I have lost multiple friends in the last 6 months over this stuff. I had a young man who came to live with me in Knoxville as a student of mine, and for years we were friends. And I suggested, and I didn't tell him he couldn't play video games. Okay, right. All I said was, hey, on Saturdays, after you play a few hours video games, I don't care. You want to go out? And there's this park I know of. There's a bunch of young girls your age. You can go out there, and maybe you can spark up a relationship. You're 19. You got your own apartment. I mean, that's status when you're 19 years old. You got you got 2 jobs. You got your own apartment. That's a little bit of status. You can get a girlfriend. Right. He has a meltdown on me because he wants to stay home for 12. This is his words. 12. Drake, I need 12 hours of Ratchet and Clank. That's what he told me, John.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys are
yeah.
shattered. They're shattered.
Yeah. I imagine, I think if you actually had a hard life where you actually had to like really face danger every day and actually know what it is to be a man, and you're not going to get something in life unless you actually go out and kill it or conquer it in some way but these guys haven't faced that. That's why they're so weak. But yeah,
they
I mean,
must be detoxed from the industrial society, man. I'm sorry, this technology, it's done a number on people, man. It's like they won't deal with their problems if they can cope with this stuff. If they know they can cope with, if they can just sit in their bed with this thing, with all these movies, all this free porn, and just sit there, they can forget about their problems, man, and they don't have to deal with them. They don't have to deal with them, or play their video games and their drugs, and they'll just escape life. And it's not just young guys. I'm not just picking on the young guys. There's plenty of dudes who are in their 50s doing the exact same damn thing. And I lost another friend over that this year.
Yeah, I mean, heck, it's just as simple as viewing. It could be on YouTube. I mean, you could be binge watching YouTube videos on Facebook, CNN, whatever news channel that you like. That it's all not reality. It's all a fake. Like dealing with people in your actual purview, in your actual interaction life, is what we're supposed to be doing and living our lives, not living in a virtual world of, I mean, heck, everything that's going on right now, right? How many people are actually involved in all the shit that's going on in the world right now? How much of it actually affects your daily life? I mean, some of it does, right? Some of the COVID stuff obviously does, with requirements and things being shut down, but like all of the riots and protests and stuff, for most people, they have very strong opinions on this. They're spending so much time reading and studying this information and getting involved with this when it really doesn't affect their life. And that, I thought it was interesting. Also, one thing that I wanted to point out was I was watching one of your videos. It was dated like 3 months ago, and it was when the COVID had first hit, and you called it. I mean, I checked the date on this, but you said the next thing that was going to come was race riots.
Yeah.
And that's precisely, I mean, this was like 3 months ago. So this was before the George Floyd. So I thought that was interesting. And it kind of just goes to show that there is a playbook here that's being followed. Yeah. And they can even give you the playbook and tell you exactly what they're going to do. And still we fucking fall for it. It's amazing.
And then a month before they started going after the police, I posted on my Discord server a passage from Jacques Attali's book, A Brief History of the Future, where he said that in the future technocracy, they're going to get rid of police, they're going to get rid of armies and judges, and all law is going to be done through mercenaries and private arbitrators.
It's kind of interesting. I just happen to see, I don't believe in coincidence at all. I happen to be going through the Dune series right now, and I'm on like book 4 of the Dune series. And it's really interesting because it just clicked this morning when I was going for my run. I was like, oh, it's like the Jesuit. They're called the there's a whole Jesuit reference in there with the mothers in there. But also in the 4th book of Dune, it's called the God Emperor, and Leto, the second, basically like morphs in, partially with this sandworm body. I guess I'm doing a spoiler, but Dune is a pretty fucking old book, so guys, you just have to cry about it. But anyway, he sets up like a world government, basically what you're describing as a technocracy, right? Where his whole thing is to get rid of all of the armies. He actually makes his warriors all women, because they will worship a man, right? And they won't try to actually, like when he had armies of men, when there was peace, they would always turn their hostilities towards the population. So he had all these like theories, and he basically like gives the whole world this like calm peace where there's nothing happening. And it's for thousands of years. It's really interesting that, because I saw that parallel as I'm listening to this book, and it's kind of scary seeing some of those things being implemented now.
That's all Joachim, man. All the hierarchical institutions, the old of men, have to fall. That was his prophecy. The third age, all the hierarchical institutions fall.
So yeah, so then we move to a more egalitarian society, right? Which is kind of the nature of when, like, men are hierarchical, right? In nature, you get a bunch of men together, they're going to figure out who the leader is, and there's going to be a chain of command. There's going to be, like, rungs.
Yeah, but
on
it's going to
the,
be all ecclesiastical, man. Like that movie, The Priest, in 2011. I think that's the closest depiction of what the future is going to be, right there. That
I
Priest
haven't
movie
seen
in
it.
2011.
Okay, I didn't see it. But.
Whatever. I watched it. It was pretty much exactly what I think is going to happen in the future. And of course, what's the primary mental weapon they use? Germ theory. To keep everybody in these smart cities, everybody afraid, everybody's submissive to the authorities. The germ theory. We are here to protect you from the virus.
Now this is interesting, because I have to say, I mean, I don't believe in COVID. I think that's whether there's something or not. I mean, there's obviously
it's an
something going
exosome
on here.
I have on my website, southernprotestant.com. I have a little track where I lay out everything what's going on with this hoax. It's just an exosome.
Well, okay,
so let me just lay out the basics of the pleomorphic theory. Okay, so Louis Pasteur, who created the germ theory, he had an enemy. His name was Antoine Béchamp. Okay, right. And Antoine Béchamp was the main scholar behind the pleomorphic theory of biology. Okay, and microbiology specifically. Basically, what he taught was that all biological life began not cells. He did not hold a cellular theory. He believed that all biological life began with what he called microzymas. A later scholar named Gaston Nossens called it somatids, and they're basically a prima materia. And your body basically, whenever it needs, these microzymous granules transmute into, and thus the pleomorphic, changing form. That's the idea. So the microzymas, if your body needs bacteria, the microzymas become bacteria. So basically, a cold, if some kind of toxin or something in your body needs to be eliminated, the first stage is a cold. And what that is your microzymous granules have changed into bacteria, or you could have dormant bacteria that become alive and they try to detoxify your body. So a cold is a bacterial detox. But if the toxic influence is too strong, your body will create a solvent, which is now called a virus. Okay, in the germ theory, your body creates this solvent. It's basically what an exosome is. And if you look at what an exosome is, it's a circular bulb-like shape. It's got a corona around it. It looks exactly like what they are showing us this hoax is. It's an exosome. It's a solvent detox. Okay, your body's creating a soap to deal with a toxin. Okay, and the word exosome, EXOSOME. Okay, exosome. And you go to my website, southernprotestant.com. I got a whole track, all the documentation on there for you. Now, all the medical journals. Go ahead.
Okay, so basically, just to lay out kind of what your position on this is. So the germ theory states that we have bacteria, we have viruses. When we get sick, it's an infection from either a bacteria or it's a virus that is injecting its RNA.
Or a parasite. They'll say a parasite can also do it to you. Our view is that parasites are good. Parasites go after dead or rotting or weak cells. They do not go after healthy cells. The best analogy I can give you is like termites. Termites don't eat living a healthy tree. They always go after weak, dying wood.
Okay, so because they're cleaning up the body, it's like the autophagy, right? It's like they have clean up the body, clean up the weaker and dead
modern doctors use maggots to help people with gangrene.
That's
same thing.
Yeah. So okay, so then the basic germ theory basically says that you have these external factors. That's what makes you sick: bacteria, viruses. There's a lot of like debate on the virus side of it, on how viruses actually operate, because the theory is that they multiply by injecting their DNA or their RNA or snippets of RNA or DNA, depending on what virus, into the cell, which then takes over hijacks the machinery, produces a bunch of viruses, cell explodes, and that's how you get more viruses, right? So, but you're saying that
it's never been seen under a microscope, but that's their theory.
Which is kind of interesting, because we can culture cells, in a petri dish, but why
Yep.
can't we actually observe the virus actually being replicated? Which
No
yeah.
organism called a virus with a nucleus, a respiratory system, a digestive system, or a reproductive system has ever been seen.
Well,
And
okay.
go ahead.
So the whole thing, this is where I have a little bit of pushback too, which is I've heard this, right? The refutation of germ theory, but the problem is like you don't need to have a respiratory or reproductive system as a virus, right? Because like the germ theory says that a virus is basically just this shell that encapsulates a piece of DNA or an RNA, and all it has to do in order to replicate, it doesn't need to respirate. It's not even alive. All it has to do is just get somewhere, and then it attaches to a cell. And then when it attaches to that cell, it injects its viral load into the cell, which takes over the machinery. And then
that sounds like a penis to me. I mean, like injecting something. I mean, it's like a penis. I mean, show it to me. I'd love to see it.
Well, I'm saying it doesn't need a reproductive system or a respiratory system. It doesn't have to live. It just has to get somewhere, and then it doesn't need its own machinery because it uses the cell's machinery to replicate itself, right? I mean, that's what I'm like. Address that part of it.
So we know that it has no way to produce its own energy, and we know that it's never been isolated outside of a cell. It's all we've ever seen is the characteristics of a cell. So the whole thing seems to me to be an appeal to ignorance and just like assuming like a theory. You know, I don't. No one's ever seen this stuff. I mean,
right. I mean, there's no pictures of. I mean, there's some electron imaging of viruses, but it's still like, again, like it doesn't describe where the origin. It doesn't indicate where the origin is, right? I mean, did it come from the cell or did it go into the cell? You know, I think until you've actually seen a virus that is attached to a cell injecting its payload, then it's pretty hard to like. It's a theory at that point.
I'm sorry, man. That sounds like sexual organ to me, man. Like injecting payload. Show me the dick, man. Show me its cock and balls. I want to see it. I'm sorry, it's never been seen.
When you look at the structures of viruses, as you know, there's definitely it's definitely shaped in such a way that it could be doing that. But here's what I think is more important to get at, right? Because I was thinking about this quite a bit.
From what I've seen, these images, they're showing you an exosome. They're not showing you a virus. They're showing you. You're talking about the thing with the corona around the side of it, right? With little it's like this circular entity, and it's got like a corona around it. That's an exosome.
So when you say exosome, define exosome.
A solvent. It is a solvent that the body creates. The microzymous granules, when they need to detox by way of solvent, they create this exosome to attack a toxin, to absorb it, sponge it up, and have it removed from the body.
Okay, so you're saying that
diarrhea or vomiting or whatever.
So that's what the virus is in that case. So what about though? Okay, because I was thinking about this a lot, and I looked at some of the cases, like explanations for some of the common viruses, but there are certain things like, you know, that are pretty consistent, right? So like take the whole thing with the hand washing, right? I forget the scientist who had fought for so long that you needed a sterile environment because in the maternity wards, the doctors that were handling the dead people when they then were helping women give birth, then they had a very high mortality rate. They were like almost all dying, and then the guy, I forgot his name now, that said to wash your hands. He had a super low, like, so what that seems to indicate, right, if you're is that it's external. That's what
The problem with that is all the medical journals will tell you, I mean, from the early 20th century and on, that bacteria is ubiquitous. It doesn't matter how much you sterilize your hospital, bacteria is ubiquitous.
I agree, and that's true, and that's, I mean, but that doesn't prove that it's not an external infection, right? Like if you cut yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you sterilize that wound and bandage it correctly, thus sealing it, you're going to have a lot lower probability of being infected.
What do you mean? What do you mean correctly? What do you mean managing it correctly? You're talking about antiseptics and stuff like that.
Right.
Because your body will create a very good repair mechanism called pus, white blood cells that are gonna eat up those dead blood cells and repair that. The way that Longinus tells us to deal with wounds, and he has healed people of scars that the medical society could not do. You put raw flesh on that thing. If I cut myself, I'm going to take some lime to that. I'm going to put some honey on it. And I'm going to put a piece of raw bloody meat on there, and I'm going to strap it on there. And I guarantee you, my wound's going to heal up a lot faster than yours. I want all that bacteria, all those nutrients into that wound, and it's going to heal up a lot faster. And Longinus was able to cure people of debilitating scar, like lifelong scars, with this method.
And that may be correct. That may be true. I'm not gonna dispute that, but it's still pretty well known that, for example, in surgery, right? Because surgery back before we had kind of modern surgery where they had clean rooms and they did wash their hands and sterilize there was a very high rate of infection. I mean, it was definitely higher, right? In the past, what's changed is that's where, again, like, these are, to me, this is like one of the biggest things that explain it. I mean, explain it without germ theory. Maybe there is an explanation, but it doesn't make much sense to me.
So you're making an argument that hospital infections decreased as disinfectant increased in, or sterilization increased in operating rooms. That's your theory. That's your argument.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, dude, I'm sorry, but like, it's admitted that the bacteria it doesn't matter. And I have it documented in my book, The Spear of Longinus. These people who are writing this stuff, who are experts in their whole life is surgical operations in a hospital, they are complaining. It does not matter how much sterilization we do. This bacteria is ubiquitous. When we take a microscope to everything that we can sterilize someone's flesh, their tissue, any table. It does not matter. The bacteria is always ubiquitous.
And I agree, and that's fine. I can accept that point. But is it not true? I mean, would you disagree that the exact variable that changed the infections in operating rooms? I'm sorry, I've not studied that specific issue. I cannot speak from a position of knowledge on that. Well, okay, let's say that you're going...
It's a good question to look into. I'll look into that.
Well, and I mean, just like if you were going in for surgery, right? Let's say that you had to like have a major surgery, let's say like a kidney removed or something like that, right? Would you yourself, and I'm just asking you just an honest question, I'm not trying to trap you or anything, but would you want the surgeon to wear gloves, sterilize him, or would you just be like, it doesn't really matter?
I would not need a surgery. I eat raw primal.
No, but if you need a surgery, this is
that kind of idea is just, it's foreign to Longinus' school, man. Like we believe that the body has an internal healing system. This whole thing about like reality being this oppressive, malicious, demonic, Gnostic reality. We don't live in that world, man. We believe that raw primal food, and I've lived it for almost a year now, and it healed me. I'm sorry.
I think there's some benefits to it. I'm not going to disagree with that. But if you had to go in for surgery, I'm asking you, would you, you're saying that you would never have to go in for surgery, which is kind of, I mean, you have to at least give me the whole, like, if you had to go in for surgery, because
show me pre-industrial peoples that needed surgeries. When you look at I mean, when you look at the works of like Weston A. Price, George Mann, Longinus, when they're going around all over, the Eskimos up in Alaska, Siberian people, Northern African people, they only get diseases when they're confronted with the industrial society. When they start abandoning their primitive way of life and start eating the white man's industrialized food, they start getting cavities, they start getting cancer. That's when they start getting diseased.
I don't really dispute that. I think there's a lot of truth to that. But regardless, I mean, there are situations like, let's say that you had a child, like a son that was born with a cleft lip, right? That would be something that would need to be corrected by surgery, right? At that point, you would have to make a choice. You make a couple choices. One, whether or not you would do the corrective surgery. Two, whether or not you would want to go to a surgeon that cleaned that had a sterilized scalpel, or if he just used a kitchen knife. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, if you had to make that choice, right?
Okay. What Anjan has said, when he was visiting in like Asian markets, everybody else would be looking for the cleanest, most crispest, looking food. He would look for the food with all the flies on it and the most bacteria looking food there. Okay, we have a totally different, opposite view of reality that y'all do. We believe the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. This is not the world, the earth. It's not some malicious demonic thing trying to attack me all the time.
Right.
So what I would control for is all things that come out of the industrial society. Okay, so I would control for pesticides, chemicals, lime, weed killers, fertilizers, bug killers, weather changes, any kind of cooking processes that person was associated with, air quality, medications, pharmaceuticals, vaccinations, drugs. Those are the kinds of things we control for.
And that's fine.
It's man-made elements in the industrial society. That's what we're looking for to control for.
And that's fine. I'm not going to dispute that at all. I'm just like, you're avoiding now the question of the surgery, of if you or your son had to get a surgery, right? Again, for some reason, right? What would you choose in that case?
I would not mind if there was. I know that bacteria is ubiquitous. There's no way bacteria is going to make my son sick.
Yeah,
or do anything wrong to him.
I mean, literally, there's one surgeon. You have a totally clean room. He's got a brand new scapula that's been sterilized, right? Wearing gloves, face mask, right? Trying to be as careful as possible. Washes his hands. The other room is a guy of equal skill level, but he's got just a regular knife. It hasn't been cleaned at all. He's not washing his hands. He doesn't wear any gloves.
Okay, so if we were living in a primitive condition, in a primitive pre-industrial land, I would not care. I would not care. But here in the industrial society, I would go with the most sterile environment. Yeah.
Okay, so but if you would go with the most sterile environment, again, I'm not trying to trap you, but I'm just saying that I think there's some truth to what, like, disputing germ theory, but I think there's also some truth to germ theory, because based on that choice, you would have to admit that there's some kind of thing externally that would cause a higher rate of infection or could harm you, right? So
industrial toxins, industrial chemicals, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So you think it's the chemicals, not something else, not a virus or
industrial
bacteria?
chemicals?
I mean, what about
the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. God did not create microscopic demons to attack me and my kids.
Okay, what about people who are like, I mean, this is common in the bodybuilding industry, right? Is, I hear this all the time from guys that they reused a needle, or they didn't sterilize a needle, and they inject themselves and they get an abscess because they create an infection because they haven't actually, like, sterilized and made sure that, like, I mean, to me, that's like a pretty clear proof that there's an external element that's not an industrial
What did
particle.
they inject? What did they inject to begin with? What did they inject in their body?
Let's say they're injecting the steroid or something like that, or
I mean, I would chalk anything, any kind of actual disease, an actual pathological influence to that to any kind of all of it comes from the industrial society. Those steroids are the things that caused his problems. I'm not look that. There's no need to inject yourself with anything in our model. We believe that most of the major viruses come from injections.
Well, I'm not saying that
major epidemics come from injections.
I'm not suggesting that you live this way of life. I'm just saying that kind of what we know from people that live in modern society is we know that people get infections, right? And what are those infections? Those infections usually come
Infection is
from,
good. Infection is good. That's a detox.
well,
Nothing wrong.
okay, but what causes the infection is not good. I agree that the infection itself serves a purpose, right? In fact, the way that we detect an infection is usually it's a warmer temperature, right? Our body's responding and is trying to heal up that area, or but we still have infections, and if you have an open wound, you're more likely to get an infection. I mean, this is like,
Yeah,
it's pretty
and
irrefutable.
when you eat raw primal, that will resolve more quickly. And this is one of the big things that people don't understand. Like, a lot of people will go to alternative medicine and they'll die doing it. And germ theorists they'll claim victory. I guarantee you, the person that did that was not eating raw primal. They did not have, the body needs the energy sources from the raw primal, raw fats, to be able to go through, to endure through the detox.
I mean,
so you need a person. The person needs to be on a long-term basis eating raw fats, raw meats, raw milk. Make sure they have kefir, plenty of bacteria, so there's plenty of flora in the body. That, in those conditions, the body will heal very quickly from these things.
And that very well may be true. I think there is a lot of truth to that, but that's still, we have to control for variables, right? If you have the variable of eating a raw meat diet, it should not matter in terms of, like, we need to remove that variable in order to say, are infections internal or externally caused, right? That's where my biggest contention is, that there's too much evidence showing that they're externally caused. Now, again, that doesn't mean that I believe that that every single infection is externally caused in the environment. I certainly think there's something weird going on with COVID. But
so in Pasteur or Chamber Pasteur by Ethel Hume, which is the classic book from our tradition on this, there was a professor named Professor Gastian, or Bastian, Bastian, and he did a number of experiments where he took these amphibious creatures from this pond, and he put them into a petri dish and he kept them in a closed environment. He killed them in the petri dish, and he watched what would happen to make sure there was no external influence whatsoever in what he observed. And he observed that these amphibious creatures, within 3 days, they started to develop these dots and a massive amount of bacteria. And over a long period of time, it was just a swarm of bacteria until this thing, like, just they consumed the tissue of this animal, and then that bacteria went back to its primordial state. That is what we have observed under a microscope in a petri dish in a completely closed environment. Bacteria, infection, all the decomposition that is not from external stimuli, that all comes from within the body, from the microzymus granules.
And I would agree that
there is a telos. There is a telos. There is a design here, and I believe that this design. Well, what's going to happen is, with my body, when I go into the ground, when I die, my microzymus granules are going to let loose a bacterial shitstorm, and it's going to eat up all my flesh, and then those bacteria are going to come. They're going to go right back to their primordial form, and they're going to await the resurrection of the dead. And God's going to use my microzymus granules to resurrect me from the dead. He's going to use that to bring me back up from the grave. Okay, no need for a soul. We don't believe in a soul in my school.
That's interesting. Okay, so the biggest issue I have here is that I agree that the bacteria does exist in the body. We have a microflora, right? We have gut bacteria. We have bacteria all over us inside our bodies, and it's a symbiotic relationship. We need to have those bacteria in order to live. If we didn't have those bacteria, we would die, right? So in the case of, like, the amphibian experiment, those bacteria would have already been present. And so the bacteria would have multiplied.
He said they arose within 3 days. After 3 days of it sitting in that petri dish, they watched it happen.
Right.
These microbes transmuted. They transmuted into bacteria.
No, the bacteria would have already existed. The bacteria would have already existed, but it would have multiplied rapidly.
That's not what he says.
Yeah, but you don't have the technology at that point in time to adequately detect whether or not there are bacteria that exist.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
How would they know?
That that was the environment that Louis Pasteur created the germ theory.
Yeah, but there was bacteria. There's bacteria everywhere. You you even said yourself, you can't perfectly sterilize anything. There will always be bacteria and virus elements wherever it is. So
he watched tissue. He watched the tissue of this animal transmute into a shitstorm of bacteria. That's what he says in the book.
So you're saying that
a completely closed environment. Dude, you got to get out of this atomism thing, dude. The world, we don't live in this world where there's like this hard and fast, like atomistic breaks between stuff, man. It's like a soup. We live in a soup, and this thing it has transmutation through it, man. It's not. You got to get out of this atomism stuff, man.
Well, okay. I mean, I do agree that it is more complicated than we understand, but in this area, it seems like, you know, there's a lot of the other stuff that you believe is pretty well researched, but in this case, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I mean, I can't. The germ theory is a thing that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because you don't have a really good explanation. Like, I mean, you're basically telling me that all viruses and bacteria are generated from the body, and that none of it is external when we get an infection, which I guess if you go back to like the origins, it had to come from somebody, right? But I mean, everyone can observe when you get a cold, and then other people in your family or close proximity get a cold. And I mean, heck, not even just a cold, but
I can answer all that.
I know you have an answer to that, but what about strep throat? Because strep throat is not just a common cold, right? That's a bacterial infection. You can do a throat swab, and you know, if you've ever had strep throat and you've been around someone else, they inevitably get strep throat, and it's pretty distinctive. It's you know.
Okay. I've heard this 1,000 times. Okay, so the idea of close proximity, we have a mechanism called the off-gassing of toxin. So when someone is in a detox, you know, sweating is one of the primary ways that the body detoxes. It's through the pores. Sure. So if you're in a close proximity with someone else, they're going to be off-gassing these toxins, and that is a way you can pick up. Another person can pick up this sickness. The second way you can have this happen is what's called somatic cycles, a flu season. There are cycles that our bodies go through, especially in the beginning of the year, when we've been sitting indoors in cold environments where we're not sweating as much in the winter. The reason why flu season happens after that is because, you know, when you come out in the spring, you're outdoors more, you're getting more sunlight, you're sweating more, your body's going to go into a detox mode. And so that's why, you know, after the winter, at the end of the winter is when people start to have flu, which makes no sense whatsoever on the germ theory. You know, on the germ theory, you guys got to believe, I'm sure you go completely with the germ theory, but the germ theory has to believe that, like, the microscopic demons, they only attack people certain times of the year, and like there's agency and like some kind of plan they have to attack at certain different times of the year. It's nonsense.
People get flu all year round, but the surgence of it rises in colder temperatures. And the theory behind it, which again, who knows, but is that you're in closer proximity because you're indoors, and that the warm weather and the sunlight tends to destroy the protection of the bacteria, or of the virus in this case. So I mean, but that doesn't really explain, like, I could get that, like that part, you know, I could give you, but like strep throat, right? This is like the one, because, you know, I'm pretty familiar with that. I know that I've given people strep throat. I know I've gotten strep throat from, and it's not just like my body cells mirroring the detox of someone else, because I could see that with a cold. Like, I'd say, okay, yeah, but like strep throat is a very specific, you know, a very specific thing that's, you know, it's,
how is it specific?
Well,
how is it specific?
It's a very specific set of symptoms that you get, and there's really no, like, there's not a variable factor in terms of, right, if you're detoxing from something, right? So if that were the case, right, then what would happen is that certain people would have a higher propensity to get it, but it's pretty much guaranteed, if you're in a household with someone that has strep throat, that you're going to get it. It doesn't matter, you know, whether you whether what your diet or anything is like, you're pretty much going to get it, because it's an infectious disease, right? It's like
correlation does not imply causation. I'm sorry, you've got off gassing of toxin. You've got different seasons of the year. It could be that it's just that time of the year for the family to detox in this way. And if you're living the exact same way, you're eating the same kinds of foods, you're living the same kinds of environments, of course your body's going to cycle the detox at the same times. And
But-
even when women get around each other, their menstrual cycle starts to sync up with each other.
No, okay, but what about things like syphilis? I mean, there's a whole list. Like, it requires so much it's so much leaps of faith in order to like justify all these things. Like, syphilis is pretty well known, killed a lot of people, right? Clearly a sexually transmitted disease, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Clearly, past, and you can also look at the rates at which, the reason why STDs are so convincing in this area is because there's different rates of transmission between men and women, which makes sense if it's an actual external transmission, right? So because of the way that, right, the sexual function, right, men are injecting into a female, women's fluids are not necessarily going into the male quite as often. So that, I mean, it makes sense with the germ theory model, like that the way that sexual transmission diseases work, right? With your model, it doesn't. There needs to be some other mechanism to explain that.
Yeah, sure, I got you. Ongenus spoke to this explicitly. So the idea of and everybody understand the Ongenus, the guy I'm talking about, Ongenus Vonderplan, is Aajonus. He's the master behind this, the modern resurgence of the champ. I just want you all to know who he is. So Ongenus basically explained STDs like this: when you have an intimate connection with someone, especially a penis and vaginal level of intimacy, you're basically, what's happening is your cells are, and if the other person has an STD, what's happening is your cells are learning how to detox like them, or learning how to detox like they're detoxing. And so it's basically like if they have a certain, we would basically chalk up STDs as kind of like a fungus. And so what's happening is your body, if you don't have an STD, the other person you're having sex with has an STD. When you have sex with them, your body learns to detox in that fungus form the way that they're detoxing. That's the idea. And a friend of mine, associate of mine, he had, an anecdote on this just recently. He was talking to this girl on SA, and she had herpes for 9 months. And her boyfriend had sex with her like every day, and he never got the herpes. So his body did. I don't know how your theory can explain that. On our theory, he didn't need to detox in that way, so he never caught it. His body didn't need to learn that detox because he didn't need to. Now, on your theory, that makes no sense at all. That just completely explodes Robert Koch's position altogether.
Well, I mean, it could be that as much as I hate to use the word asymptomatic, that he probably does have the virus. I mean, he probably does have the virus.
The whole idea of asymptomatic viruses and bacteria just destroys the germ theory. Well, it's all a total. It's all special pleading.
I fall on both sides of that one, because I feel like it's being overused, but you have certain cases like chickenpox and shingles, right? If you get chickenpox when you're young, you can get shingles when you're older. I mean, there's a direct correlation between those two things, right? Like people who have never had chickenpox don't get shingles, right? It's like it's the same virus that causes those things. So that's why it's like,
not a virus. It's a well-known. This is ancient world stuff, man. It's blood purification process. It's all it is. It's not a virus. Your body is purifying your blood. I got that all listed out. Hold on.
The problem though is, okay, so with everything that you're saying here, like the cells, your body mimicking, learning how to detox from other cells, everything else that you've kind of, we've really talked about it, and I feel like maybe this is just an inconsistency, has had a lot of rigor behind it. Like, where's the test to show, like, these are provable things, right? These are testable things, right? So again, I'm not 100% on board with germ theory as it is, right? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't explain a lot of things, but it does explain some of the things. But those things are, at least they're tested. What you're suggesting hasn't like, where's the test, right? So if my cells can mimic someone else's cells doing a detox, by what mechanism do they do that? What structures within cells do that? How does that process happen, right? So, for example, like, we understand things like the Krebs cycle. Like, we understand how ATPs are generated, right, from glucose molecules, right? We understand how, like, energy systems work within the body, and we can create those systems. We understand how enzymes work in chemical reactions, right? So, in the case of this, right, I could potentially accept that germ theory is false, but you would have to provide me with some kind of framework that explains how this mechanism works, not just anecdotal evidence that shows that, or a possible explanation. Because what you're giving me is a lot of possible explanations, and I can't, like, completely refute them, but at the same time, you're not really giving a mechanism for how this works, and that's the biggest problem I have with what you're saying.
That sounds like appeals to ignorance to me. And like incredulity. Those arguments sound like to me.
Well, but I mean,
I will admit I have stuff to learn. And, like, look, Ongenus was hounded by, like, deep state agents, and we believe that they killed him over this. Okay, like, we haven't had some school in society where people can go to and learn this stuff. Like, this is like fringe stuff that we're having to, like, figure out on our own here. And, like, yeah, we don't have everything figured out. We haven't had 100 years of the U.S. Department of Education funding us and giving us the access to resources. Dude, it is illegal in most places to even drink raw milk. Okay. If we can get an environment where we can, long term study this stuff out. Look, I've spent 20 years of my life doing theology and science and metaphysics and stuff. I'm just into this thing with germ theory in the last, like, 8-9 months here. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
I can't write a 1,000-page tome on every disagreement in the history of the world. I'm sorry. I've only got 70, John.
I just feel like this one, like, so like, this one is not as like, you don't have as much good evidence here, whereas a lot of your other things that you believe, you've got some really good arguments here. It's like, this is how it could work. You see what I'm saying? Like, versus when I look at the stuff that you have,
four arguments, irrefutable, that the germ theory is wrong. Number one, bacteria is ubiquitous. Number two, bacteria.
Hold on. Let's take each one, because bacteria being ubiquitous doesn't, in my mind, that doesn't refute germ theory, right? Because
it makes the whole thing special pleading. You're having to make constant exceptions from the general rule on a regular basis. That is a fallacy. It's called special pleading.
If bacteria is everywhere, that doesn't disprove or prove anything. How does that, like, disprove germ theory, that bacteria is everywhere?
Because if bacteria cause diseases, there would be disease everywhere. We would be diseased constantly on a regular basis.
Well,
there would be
it's
no
like
health at all.
Well, it's like risk or go, right? It's like, you've got a lot of bacterias that are in a constant battle with each other, right? And when one bacteria overgrows, like, that's why, I mean, it happens all the time, right? If you take an antibiotic, a lot of times what will happen is you'll get sick because you'll kill off all of one type of bacteria, and then another bacteria will have free reign to take over your system, and that will cause you a problem, right? So, I mean, like, that explains, like, the fact that
for people who are not eating raw primal. Go ahead.
That's fine, but again, like you can't isolate. Like, we have to isolate against that case, because you can't just say, well, I mean, if you're eating raw primal, then you're right. Probably you would have enough bacteria that would replenish, and you wouldn't have the problem. But in the case of people taking antibiotics,
you're admitting my arguments, and then on the other side of your mouth, you're saying you don't have any arguments. It's like,
no. What I'm saying is that I believe that what you're saying about eating raw primal is actually beneficial, and that having a healthy gut flora is something that you have as a result of eating the way that you're suggesting. I think that there's some real truth to that, and there's some actual good science behind that, but that doesn't disprove anything about germ theory just because bacteria are everywhere. I say bacteria.
Because according to Koch's postulate, if the germ is there, the disease has to be there.
Well,
that's the whole point.
Okay,
it just makes the whole theory just like unfalsifiable.
That's a ridiculous idea, that if the germ is there, then the disease has to be there, because we have a lot of because there's so many examples in nature where something can exist and that's only harmful to a certain degree, right? So for example, every single apple that you eat, an apple seed has arsenic in it, right? If you eat a apple seed, you're not going to be harmed. You could eat 5 apple seeds, but if you eat 100 apple seeds, you're going to be very, very sick.
These are more appeals to ignorance. It more appeals to ignorance. Okay, so how again? When I took this Professor Fox's course on infectious disease, he never tells you how much bacteria has to be there to cause a disease. It's all just speculation and guessing.
Right. That's
it's just like it's okay.
Yeah, that's a solid point. So I guess this is what I'm saying. This is kind of where I'm standing. I don't think germ theory as it stands is correct, because there's too many holes in it, and you can poke some holes in it. But what you're saying is also equally unlikely to me. I think there's somewhere that we don't know, right? Like these explanations you're giving me don't make much sense. Just like some of the things of germ theory don't make sense. But
that's appeal to the stone. That's a fallacy.
I don't know.
It doesn't make sense. It's not an argument. That's just incredulity and appeal to the stone. That's just a fallacy.
I know. I'm just giving you an opinion here, I suppose, in this case. But because but I mean, you don't have solid arguments that disprove germ theory and have some other theory that replaces it, that explains all the phenomenon that we see, right? But you're also correct that germ theory also doesn't explain all the phenomenon that we see. Just like Newton's model and the quantum model don't explain, everything independently as well, right? I mean, I think that's
no. But when I'm talking about the nature of the sun, that's the heart of the whole theory. If you've got the sun wrong, the whole theory's gone. Heliocentric. I mean, and not only is heliocentric, but in Tycho Brahe's model, the sun is the primary attractive feature in that whole model. Okay, I'm not just hitting on the margin, the sidelines here. I'm going right for the heart of that theory. Now, let me finish before you interrupt me here. These are my 4 primary arguments. Okay, and I got like dozens of them in my book, but these are the 4 primary ones. Number 1, that bacteria is ubiquitous.
Okay, so we got the first one, and I'm not giving you that is like disproves germ theory. Aside from this fact that you're saying hold on, let me see if I get this right. You're saying that the reason why it disproves germ theory is because part of germ theory states that if the organism or the bacteria or virus is present, if the germ is present, then the sickness is present, essentially.
There has to be. Well, if the cause is there, the effect has to be there. That's cause and effect relationship.
Well, I'm saying that there has to be a certain amount. That's why I use arsenic, right? If you have a little bit of poison in your body, you're not going to have the symptoms of being poisoned. But if you have a lot, you'll die potentially, right? So.
Okay, you're just guessing. You're appealing to ignorance. You're hoping that there's a certain amount of bacteria, if it gets in a certain area, that will cause a disease. You have no evidence of that. You're just hoping that that's the case.
But at the same token, you're saying that since bacteria is everywhere, then you're saying that can't be.
And it doesn't cause disease.
But you don't have a proof.
It's a very natural conclusion from the facts.
If it's everywhere, then it doesn't cause disease.
Yeah.
Because, but you'd have to compare 2 things, right? So what if we had one environment where you had a mix of bacteria, okay, and another environment where you had, let's say, a huge amount of strep bacteria, right? Would that second, could we test those 2 environments and see if they equally cause or do not cause disease, right? That would be a test that I would want to, you could easily test this out, right? So it's
I couldn't do that. I'd like to see some doctors who have done that. I'd love to read it. Sure.
Right. I mean, but that would be until that test is done, it's pretty hard to say that just because it's ubiquitous that it disproves that idea, right? Because I think most scientists, most virologists would probably agree that the reason why you get sick is because it has to be in enough a quantity to overwhelm your your defense systems, your
Okay.
immune defense systems, right? I mean, I think that's what most
I
people
mean,
would say, right?
saying it's a quantity is not an art. I mean, it's just like it's just speculation. You
But
know,
whether that's like true
if
germ
if
theory,
it's ubiquitous, it's ubiquitous, man. Like it's you've eliminated that as a variable.
okay, well, I
Hold
don't
on,
know.
let me read
Disagree.
Koch's
But go into the
postulate.
second one. Go to the second one.
All right. So the second argument is that bacteria has been used to cure cancer. That Dr. Arab at the University of Toronto is using E. coli bacteria to cure tumors in people's brains, and Professor Lowe at the University of Yale is using salmonella to do the same thing.
Okay.
So bacteria is not causing cancer, it's not causing disease, it's curing it.
Well, okay. So I would agree that bacteria doesn't cause cancer. There's not, right. Cancer is caused by a defect in the replication of the cell, specifically when both there's a defect and there's also the machinery that causes the cell to not replicate.
So why doesn't it happen in the pre-industrial world?
Why doesn't cancer ever happen in the pre-industrial world?
Why doesn't it happen in the pre-industrial world?
We don't really have a lot of evidence to support that it did or didn't happen then. But that's beside.
We've got tons of evidence. Weston A. Price, George Mann, Anjan studied all these pre-industrial people. That is well known. They do not have cancer. They do not have heart disease. They do not have cavities.
We don't know that any of them. Well, the cavities is pretty good. But there's a lot of, regardless. Let's. I mean, I don't really want to side trail down that too much, because you're basically saying that because bacteria could cure cancer or help kill cancer, that it can't be causing some other ailment in the body, right? Because cancer and infectious disease, like being sick, are two different things, right? I mean, I don't think anyone really like confounds those as the same thing, right? I mean, you see what I'm saying, right? Like it's the same thing. Like I could say,
do you know how Anjan cured his patients of cancer? He cured hundreds of people of cancer. You know how he did it?
Huh?
Chytrophagia. He had people eat shit.
Okay.
For years on end. And he cured them. They didn't get sick. He cured them of cancer.
There's a lot of bacteria in there.
Yeah,
a good thing. Yeah, in general, bacteria is a good thing, right? I mean, I'm with you on that, but certain bacterias in certain amounts can definitely cause illness. From what I shouldn't say definitely, but from what all of the evidence points to, like the fact that some bacteria.
Citation needed.
All right, here you go. So penicillin, right? Penicillin is the byproduct of bacteria, correct?
Penicillin is the byproduct of bacteria. Okay.
But it cures a lot of disease within the body.
Okay, so what you guys mean by cure, we would say you turned off the detox. So like antibiotics are a way for doctors to turn off people's detox, and what all they're doing is they're postponing these detoxes until later in life, and that's why so many people end up with cancer. They keep turning off their detoxes throughout life, and so when they get older, they end up with just massive amounts of cancer. On our view, cancer is basically the body's reaction to just being overladen with toxin in an area, and it's a way to basically barrier off a certain area of the body. And the way to break that down is to reintroduce bacteria. You have to reintroduce. People are too sterile. They need to detox. The way to do that, you reintroduce bacteria. That's how you do it. And you feed the body with plenty of raw fat, and so that they have the energy resources to sustain themselves. And a lot of people they go off the alternative route, and they end up messing themselves up because they don't feed themselves with the resources they need to endure through that detox.
And I think that I'm not in disagreement with that. I think there's a lot of evidence that shows that in general bacteria are healthy, right? I mean, I myself take prebiotics, and I try to not use like anything like antiseptic soap that will kill bacteria, because it is part of our natural environment, and I believe those things are correct. I think there's a lot of evidence for that. But
well, the people at Answers in Genesis will tell you different. It's not part of our natural environment. That was a result of the fall, and
that
that
seems a
they
little
believe
ridiculous to me. Yeah, I know.
It's perfectly in keeping with the Gnostic foundations of Christian theology. They believe that in the Gnostic theology, the fall was this race of demons invaded into the world of light and the pure souls, and it's exactly what germ theory is.
Well,
exactly
I mean, that's not. There's a difference between saying that a virus and a bacteria, like, and calling it a demon. I mean, something that harms you.
It's a result of the fall. It's a result of sin. That's what they teach.
I don't know. I think that's. Read
the Answers in Genesis article.
I agree that they think that, but that seems like a pretty big stretch to me. But regardless, I still don't think that you can really make a really strong case that because bacteria can be helpful in some situations, that they can't be harmful in others. I mean, that's really what your second argument is coming to, and it doesn't.
I'll admit that. Hold on. If you have, but the thing, the way that you guys interpret the word harm, we don't. Like, take for instance, I was just explaining this to a friend of mine. When I feel like I need a detox, I will let a piece of raw meat. I just did this last week. I'll let a piece of raw meat just sit in my car for like 3 days, and then I'll eat it. And I'll get diarrhea that night. Okay, but for the rest of the week, I feel great. I need to put a whole lot of bacteria into my system, so it'll help me detox. And that detox is what you guys would call sick or bad influences or something pathological. We don't believe that. We believe that it's a detox. I'm detoxing my body.
And some of those detoxes I could even give you are good, but I mean, you're familiar with botulism, right? Or salmonella poisoning, right? I mean, these are like, you have salmonella outbreaks when feces from an animal gets on, let's say, spinach and goes across the country, and then people get sick and die. So I mean, that's like
why haven't dogs eliminated themselves from the earth? Because they eat each other's shit constantly. They're constantly eating shit.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them could be that they're used to it and their systems are able to handle it. The second one could be that they're not eating the shit of animals that are infected with salmonella.
Okay, I mean, but you still have a lot of E. coli bacteria in any turd. I mean, it's going to be loaded with E. coli bacteria.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. But at the same time, it's still like, I mean, like botulism, for example, right? I mean, botulism is not a detox. It'll kill you. Like it's very bad, right?
I have not studied botulism specifically. I'll have to study that.
Okay. Now, botulism, just so I'm being honest here, is not actually caused by the bacteria directly. It's the byproduct of the metabolism, the metabolites of the bacteria, right? So when the bacteria eats the food, it decomposes the food. It produces a poison.
Oh, I got an answer to that. Yeah, the main Wikipedia article says here that it's caused by a toxin produced by bacterium. Clostridium botulinum. Yeah, I remember studying that. The German doctor, Stefan Lanka, he discussed this. The reason why you guys think that that bacteria causes toxins is because you don't understand pleomorphism. You guys, the germ theory interprets spores as toxic. You don't understand on the pleomorphic theory, the bacteria will devolve back into their spore phase to re-energize, and once they've been re-energized, they'll go back to being a bacteria. It's not that the spore has eliminated the bacteria. It's that the bacteria is pleomorphic. It changes form. And so it'll change form from one to a lower form of a spore, and then it'll re-energize itself and then go back to a bacteria.
And I would accept that. I think that's pretty well accepted and proven, right? I mean, when you have bacteria that you subject to a very low temperature, they go back into a spore state and they can survive for thousands of years, and then they can come back to life under the right conditions, right? So that I don't have any problem with. But at the same time, I still don't think the second point of saying that bacteria are harmful and are helpful in some cases proves that that they can't be harmful in other cases. It's a flimsy argument to be honest, right? But what else do you have? So you've got, I mean, the two. What I'm looking for the smoking gun here, because I mean, there's something fishy about the modern understanding of germ theory. I agree with that, but I don't think what you're suggesting is correct. But prove me wrong. Like, fine.
I got the smoking gun. Everybody's got cancer, and everybody's addicted to caffeine and sugary drinks. Everybody's fat and diseased, got heart disease. As the germ theory gets more powerful, the diseases get more powerful. I mean, come on. There's a direct and what you have in pre-industrial societies, you got no cancer, you got no heart disease.
Well, but
I'm sorry. Why? Because you got no germ theory, and you got no industrialized toxins.
Well,
all right.
Okay. I mean, but that doesn't disprove that germs come from.
Let me give you number three. Okay. Let me give you number three. So, viruses and bacteria are all admitted now to be asymptomatic. They on a regular basis, they dwell in the body dormant and asymptomatic. That refutes Koch's first postulate. Destroys it.
But if the germ is present, then the disease is present. Now that one I have to give you that both point 1 and point 3 do refute that. So, but I don't think that is really modern germ theory. I don't think anyone thinks that if the germ is present, then the disease is present. There's no doctor that would hold to that. But the fact that, so you're saying for the third case is that because hold on, give me the third case again. Or the third reason.
Viruses and bacteria remain in the body asymptomatic.
So okay. So is that not possible that it could be dormant? I mean, I again, I have a problem with that one too. Like, I don't understand how that, like, that there I would challenge medicine to say, show me how does a virus become dormant? How does a bacteria become dormant? Like, what turns it on? What, that seems weird to me. But
it's pleomorphic. That's the whole point. It's pleomorphic. All right. So number 4 is no organism with a nucleus, a respiratory system, digestive system, reproductive system has ever been seen under a microscope. That's number 4.
Well, but that one we already talked about. It doesn't have to, like, for example, bacteria definitely have a reproductive system and a respiratory system. I've seen it myself under a microscope, studying it in biology, and I've seen bacteria replicate. Right. I mean, single-celled organisms as well, non-bacteria organisms that replicate as well. So that, I mean, if you're talking about viruses, then you're correct in that we have electron imaging of viruses, but it doesn't show any structure besides a shell and some DNA.
All we've seen is characteristics of cells. That's all we've seen. We've never seen this thing outside of a cell invading another cell. Well, we've never seen it. It's a theory. It's theology, and I would maintain it's theology. It's a Manichaean, Gnostic theology.
We do have electron images of viruses. I mean, that I'm looking it up here just to make sure I'm right, but
everybody, y'all can see all the viruses under a microscope that have not been manipulated on Stephen Lanka's website. I mean, he won a court case in Germany, in Stuttgart, on this issue in 2016. He challenged the medical industry to prove that the measles virus, the germ theory fit with the measles virus. He challenged them, and he won the court case.
Well, okay, but this is showing, right? I mean, we have electron image is of viruses here. Right, so you're saying that this is an exophage, right, or an exosome?
Exosome,
right?
But no, so I don't. I'd have to look at that image myself. I'm not sure what you're looking at there, but all of Stephen Lanka's images that when they show a herpes virus, a measles virus, it's all in a cell. There is no isolated viruses ever outside of a cell. They're always just characteristics of a cell.
Well, but I mean, these.
And you have to. This is another thing that I don't think you guys understand properly. We have shown that there is a more primordial form than just a cell. The microzymus that Bechamp showed, that Dr. Bastian showed, that Gaston Nassin showed. These things have been put to nuclear radiation. They have been put to sub-zero temperatures. I think Gaston Nassin said it was like negative 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Every form of like physical cutting into these things. It's never. No one can destroy these things. They're indestructible. They're immortal.
Okay. Yeah. I just don't think there's there's enough to show that that germ theory is incorrect. I haven't seen any smoking gun yet.
Okay.
Yeah. But what about, okay, one other thing I wanted to ask you about though was what you thought about atoms, because that's another one, right? Like, because I heard you say something about not believing that atoms existed, and I agree that it's a model, right? I mean, and that model has changed dramatically over the years, which is kind of surprising. But I mean, do you not believe that there's actual building blocks of or obviously there's got to be some building blocks. What are the building blocks?
The building blocks of all biological life are microzymous granules. That is all interpreted in a continuum mechanics view of reality. It's not atomistic.
So when you
no
say
one's ever seen an atom. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, no one's ever seen an atom. True, but we have other ways of detecting atoms, right? And even smaller particles than atoms that make up atoms.
No one's ever seen an atom. I have it documented from like 5 textbooks, from the 1930s all the way up until today. That no one's ever seen this thing. And if you look at Michio Kaku, he did a C-SPAN interview. Let me pull this up here. I have it in my encyclopedia. He admitted that modern science has moved away from atomism. They reject atomism now. That's the C-SPAN. It's called In Depth with Michio Kaku, October 3rd, 2010. And it's at the 55-minute and 45-second mark. He admits that modern science has moved away from atomism.
Well, okay, so then what in place of atomism, right? So I mean, you could say that.
Look,
say again.
The continuum mechanics. The most popular theory in the continuum mechanics school is the ether theory, and I have not studied that to the degree that I would like to be completely convinced of the ether theory, but I do believe in continuum mechanics, because in the first chapter of Genesis we have transmutation. God is transmuting the water into land in the first chapter in Genesis. So the Bible does teach a form of alchemy and transmutation.
Well, but we've never seen any transmutation. Right, I mean,
Antoine Béchamp and Professor Bastian, all of them watched transmutation. That's what pleomorphism is. It's all transmutation.
What kind of transmutation? Like what substance changed to another substance?
Microzymous, transmuting into bacteria, transmuting into spores, transmuting into all kinds of different microbes, man.
Okay, but that could be there could be a mechanism very well that's constructed at the atomic level that allows it to happen. I mean, we know of the spore, that bacteria do turn into spores, and there's no it doesn't defy the idea that they're made of atoms.
The concept of an atom is contradictory on its face. I mean, if you even believe this happened, do you believe that the atom was split in the 1930s by, what was that guy's name? Enrico Fermi or whatever. He and Einstein, they split the atom.
Well,
that was
considering that we have nuclear power. I would say that it's accurate. Well, I mean, you can also.
Do you believe you believe nuclear bombs exist? You believe a nuclear bomb was detonated over Hiroshima and Nagasaki? You really believe that?
You can go there. I mean, and you can detect the radiation levels.
Well, I mean, it was predicted by scientists that they should not have been able to build Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They started rebuilding that place right away. And I mean, if you can show me evidence that there were people that had cancer or something from radiation poisoning, I'd love to see it. I've looked for it for a while. That place was firebombed. There's no nuclear. Yeah. I don't think there's any nuclear weapons ever exist. That was all propaganda in the media to get us to accept the United Nations.
What about Chernobyl? Chernobyl.
What about it?
I've watched, videos from independent people that have gone there with the Geiger counter
Yeah.
and detected radiation there. So
Okay, well, that doesn't prove that there was a nuclear bomb went off. It doesn't. I mean, it doesn't prove. I mean, were
it
those
doesn't
readings?
absolutely
Were
prove
those
it.
readings what the previous scientists predicted they would be?
Well, okay, so if there's not atoms though, then what is then how do you explain like modern chemistry and controlled chemical reactions and our ability to basically manipulate matter based on, I mean, there must be another like that model.
Pragmatism, man. It's just trial and error. The scientists will tell you that, man. They are very rarely consistent with their theories. They just do trial and error stuff, man.
Well, chemistry is pretty exact. Like chemistry is pretty well
Sure,
known.
yeah, you can do trial and error very exact. It doesn't mean like all your metaphysical theories have to are necessarily, involved with those trial and error. But dude, like no one, it is admitted, no one has ever seen this thing. No one's ever seen an atom. And you read all the predictions from the popular science manuals that have existed for like over 100 years. They all stated that light is of such a nature and atoms are of such a nature that it is forever impossible for anyone to ever see an atom. It is just true. It's all just theory and speculation. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it is a model, but that model works for predicting chemical reactions, right? I mean, like you can look at the periodic table of elements and you can figure out exactly what will happen when you combine two elements and isotopes of elements because you know that if one is positively charged or has an extra electron, and then you bring it into contact with another specific element, that it will attract that charge and will form a bond.
Yeah.
in many cases as they share the electron. Like, so those things.
Hold on. The guys that built our modern electrical grid, they didn't believe in electrons. They didn't believe in any of this atomistic theory. All the guys that built this, James Clerk Maxwell, Heaviside, Faraday, Nikola Tesla, none of these guys, the guys that built our modern electrical grid, they did not believe in electrons. And one of the biggest proofs, Ken Wheeler, who's a YouTuber, one of the biggest proofs that he uses to prove this, to refute the electron theory, if you ever see a power line that's been cut down, and you see all this electricity just pouring out the back of it. If electricity had mass, that power line would be propelled forward. It would be pushed forward by all that electricity being pushed out the back of it. It would be propelled forward. It's not, because electricity has no mass.
It does. Actually, one of the dangers of a power line going down is that thing whips around because of
it's
that.
Not propelled forward. It's not propelled. The power line is not propelled forward. It would be.
It whips around. If you've ever seen video of, I could try and bring up video of a power line going down. It whips around like it's like a monster.
You're not answering what I'm saying. You're not addressing what I'm saying. Sorry.
No, it does propel itself. It does move, right?
No, it does. I've seen multiple of them myself. It does not propel forward.
I think. Let me see if I can bring up a video of
the end of it. The end of it may like twist around a little bit, but the line is not propelled forward.
I swear.
Back to what I said earlier.
Okay.
If you admit that Enrico Fermi and Albert Einstein created nuclear fission, then atomism is refuted. Because atomism is the idea that atoms are impenetrable, indivisible. That's what the word atom means. It's indivisible. That's what it means.
Well, I mean, yes, but that's a technicality, right? Like that's.
Technicality.
Well, it's
the definition of the entity we're talking about is that it's indivisible.
It's poorly named. The reason why it was named an atom was because they thought that was the smallest division of matter. But clearly there are electrons, protons, and neutrons, and then even within those, you've got quarks and you've got
that's what no one's seen any of this stuff. This is all metaphysics. It's all theory these guys have come up with, so you give them your money in these universities.
Yeah, but the problem is
they're doing the exact same thing the Christians do in these seminaries and churches. They have thought up these metaphysical systems, and they want you to buy them. in their
The
seminaries.
only problem, though, okay, the only problem here, Drake, is that we have the technology that we're using right now. I mean, computers basically work off of silicon wafers, and the way that exchange happens is
No,
through electrons.
the whole electrical system we live in was created by people who did not believe in the atomistic theory.
That
James
doesn't mean
Clerk Maxwell, Oliver Heaviside, Faraday, Tesla, they did not believe in electrons. They did not believe in atomism. No, sir.
Yeah, that's fine. They didn't have to believe in it, but the electron circuits
That's
that
the
we
whole
have.
argument you were just making.
No,
It's the
but
whole argument you were just making.
it doesn't matter if they believe in it.
Our modern electrical grid is based on these theories. No, it's not. I'm sorry, you're wrong. You are flatly wrong. The guys that built the modern electrical grid,
right?
John Clark Maxwell, Oliver Heaviside, Tesla, Faraday, they did not believe in electrons. They did not believe in atomism.
Right. You don't have to understand how it works in order for it to work, right? So, but in order to get to the level of actual computer science level of computer engineering, you do have to understand how it works, and it does have to work that way in order for gates to be created.
Trial and error, man. They just do trial. Look, I know these. They do trial and error, man. It's not. No one is like rigidly holding to some ideology while they're doing this shit. It's just trial and error, and
no.
Sorry.
See, I have to disagree with you there, because I literally went to D-Wave, which is a quantum computer company, and I stepped into the quantum computer, and
quantum physics is all metaphysics. It's admitted metaphysics, man. Carlo Rovelli admits it's metaphysics,
but it's solved.
It's not science.
But their computers solved intractable computer science problems.
Okay.
So the engineering that they used to create those computers worked because the model was accurate enough to work.
I can predict when the sun's going to rise tomorrow, when the next year is going to come about by assuming the flat Earth model. I can predict a bunch of stuff by assuming the flat Earth model. That doesn't prove you're not going to accept that that's right or wrong.
No, granted, you can, but that's not at anywhere near the complexity of a integrated circuit, right? An integrated circuit is extremely complex, and it does depend very much on electrical charge. And heck, I've overclocked my CPU before. I can tell you, like, we know how DRAM works and the timings of and voltage and how it affects the CPU and the calculations in the CPU. If you
all I can tell you is the same thing I've said multiple times now, man. I'm sorry, you don't want to face this, but it's a historical fact. The men that built our modern electrical grid did not believe in atomism. They did not believe in electrons. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but see that argument. I grant you that. I grant
passing
you that.
by it.
I grant you that. I grant you that. That doesn't change the fact that the people who are designing integrated circuits today do believe it, and that they build those circuits which work based on those models.
Modern science has been pragmatic ever since, pretty much since Piercy Brigman, with his work, The Logic of Modern Science. They don't have a rigid ideology. And if you read my encyclopedia, you'll see all the contradictory and pluralistic mechanisms. Modern science uses, it's like a chimera of just like many different theories. They constantly switch back from continuum mechanics. Like, take, for instance, tidal theory. Tidal theory is a big one. They use continuum mechanics when they approach water. When modern scientists are dealing with water, they don't use particle mechanics. They use continuum mechanics. The modern science is a chimera. It's a chimera of pragmatic, different schools who have done trial and error more with their theory in a certain field, and they just all bundle this stuff together in this big chimera. They don't. No one's holding. So some of the physicists are Newtonians. Some of them are quantum. Some of them are Einstein, and all of them work together. They're all considered modern science, but they have contradictory theories everywhere.
Right.
And there is no one rigid theory that everybody is holding to when they're building their technology. I'm sorry.
Correct. You're correct to some degree, but there are models that do work. right? Like, for example, Newtonian physics, the model
Flat
of
Earth.
Newtonian physics. Well, it works for the purpose of calculating many things that we have to within engineering, right? And then the model again of atomic theory, the model of the atom, the model of electron flow and positive and negative charge and electromagnetic waves, all of those models work. Although they're not, I agree with you, they're not an absolute accurate representation of reality, but those models do hold true and they do work for the calculations that we do at a very precise level. Like they do produce quite a few things. As those models become more refined over time, then, you know, technology will advance, and that's what we've seen historically. But to say that those models don't even work when you're on a computer that is actually exhibiting the model, to me, that doesn't make much sense.
John, I want to go get drunk, man. I want to go drink some whiskey. It's
get
Friday
some
night.
Yeah. All right.
I'm tired. I'm tired
All
of
right.
debating.
Yeah. No, this was fun though. This is good. This is good. Yeah. No, I appreciate. Yeah, we should probably be wrapping. I got to go for my walk anyway. I do my nightly walk. But no, this was good, man. This is good. Yeah. No, I appreciate you jumping on here, and yeah. Hopefully, we got some people thinking, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
I think that's the most important thing. But yeah. I'm trying to think. Anything else that you wanted to add or to?
I'd like to. In the next, I actually had this in front of me the whole time. We never got to it.
Okay.
I wanted to address, you know, your thing about my cringe Iron Throne stuff.
Oh yeah.
And,
okay. So
and my conspiracy thing. Not.
All
I
right.
can't do this. I gotta go. I've been working all day. I gotta go. But
all right.
Maybe in a future episode.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think we've kind of already addressed it just by, I think people listening to you can sort of get an idea of
my
stuff.
cringe.
Well, because I think in your writing you come across a little more forceful than what you actually are. But you know, most good teachers do that because by the extreme you make a much you make a point a lot better. But
all right.
But yeah, so we didn't even get into the form of how did you put it so that YouTube wouldn't flag you? The form of not control of you know, the S word that no one wants to say, but
the S word that no one wants to say. I don't know what you mean. SLAD. The institution.
The institution. So, all right, Drake. Well, appreciate it, man. Have a good night. All right, take care, brother.